abortion. We'd go back to the 1950s, father knows best, where every child is wanted and every marriage is happy, right? Instead, now that abortion is illegal in 20 red states, we have a return to deadly back alley abortions. Republicans told us if we just killed off civics and history classes in school, we'd liberate our young people to study math and science, right? Now, 2 generations of Americans can't even name the 3 branches of government, much less explain the meaning of the Constitution's general welfare phrase. Republicans told us if we just stopped enforcing the anti-monopoly and antitrust laws that had protected small businesses for nearly 100 years, that big businesses would get bigger and more efficient. Well, they sure did that, and they wiped out the ability of small businesses to start. We no longer, I mean, you visit any mall in America, do you see locally owned companies? I don't. They said if we just changed the law to let corporations pay their senior executives with stock, that they'd be incentivized. Well, instead they're incentivized to take billions, hundreds of billions of dollars a year out of corporations and put it in their own pockets instead of companies developing new things. They told us if we just turned our healthcare decisions over to insurance companies instead of doctors, the system would get more efficient, right? Yeah. They told us if we just let a handful of individual companies and billionaires buy most of our media, that 1,000 media flowers would grow. How did that work out? They told us if we just got rid of our unions, then the corporate bosses would look kindly on us and give us better pay. Yeah, right. That was a lie, too. They told us if we just went with a trade agreement that Bush and Reagan had negotiated, NAFTA, that we see an explosion of jobs. Oh, we saw an explosion, all right. 60,000 factories gutted. They told us global warming was a hoax. It's a hoax. Yeah, the hoax, turns out, was the lie that there's no such thing as global warming. And then there's the biggest GOP lie of all. Money is the same thing as free speech. The bottom line here is that we have now had for 43 years the full Republican experience. And we don't want to hear Republicans sermonizing about deficits that they caused, or welfare programs that they damaged, or even whatever they call faith these days, be it the death penalty, forcing raped children to give birth at the barrel of a gun, or burning books. We're over it, Republicans. A new America is being birthed right now, right in front of us, and you and your morbidly rich patrons can't stop it anymore. I'll be right back. In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at ThomHartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at ThomHartmann.com. So check them all out at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com. Hi, for our book club today, we're reading from Bernie Sanders' new book, Where We Go From Here, 2 Years in the Resistance. This is from the introduction.
During my campaign for president in 2016, I stated over and over again that the future of our country was dependent upon our willingness to make a political revolution. I stressed that real change never occurs from the top down. It always happens from the bottom up. No real change in American history, not the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the gay rights movement, the environmental movement, or any other movement for social justice has ever succeeded without grassroots activism, without millions of people engaged in the struggle for justice. That's what I said when I ran for president. That's what I believe now. That's what I've been working to accomplish over the last several years. At a time of massive and growing income and wealth inequality, as our nation moves closer and closer to an oligarchic form of society, we need an unprecedented grassroots political movement to stand up to the greed of the billionaire class and the politicians they own. And the good news is we're making progress. People in every region of our country are standing up and fighting back against the most dishonest and reactionary president in the history of the republic. In state after state, they're also taking on establishment politicians who are more concerned about protecting their wealthy campaign contributors than they are with the needs of the middle class and the working people they're supposed to represent. We're making progress when millions of people in every state in the country take to the streets for the Women's March in opposition to Trump's reactionary agenda. We're making progress when an unprecedented grassroots movement elects a young African American as mayor of Birmingham, Alabama. We're making progress when tens of thousands of Americans turn out at rallies and town hall meetings to successfully oppose the Republican effort to throw 32 million people off health insurance. We're making progress when governors and local officials announce in response to student demands tuition-free public colleges and universities. We're making progress when over the past 2 years, hundreds of first-time candidates of every conceivable background run for school board, city council, state legislature, and Congress, and many of them win. The good news is that the American people are far more united than the media would like us to believe. They get it. They know that over the past 40 years, despite a huge increase in worker productivity, the middle class has continued to shrink while the very rich have become very much richer. They know that for the first time in the modern history of the United States, our kids will likely have a lower living standard than us. The bad news is that instead of going forward together, demagogues like Trump win elections by dividing us. The bad news is that too many of us are getting angry at the wrong people. I was not an immigrant picking strawberries it was not an immigrant picking strawberries at $8 an hour who destroyed the economy in 2008. It was the greed and illegal behavior of Wall Street. It was not transgender people who threw millions of workers out on the street as factories were shut down all across the country. It was profitable multinational corporations in search of cheap labor abroad. Our job, for the sake of our kids and grandchildren, is to bring our people together around a progressive agenda. Are the majority of people in our country deeply concerned about the grotesque level of income and wealth inequality that we are experiencing? You bet they are. Do they believe that our campaign finance system is corrupt and enables the rich to buy elections? Overwhelmingly they do. Do they want to raise the minimum wage to a living wage and provide pay equity for women? Yes, they do. Do they think that the very rich and large corporations should pay more in taxes so that all of our kids can have free tuition at public universities and colleges? Yep. Do they believe that the United States should join every other major country and guarantee health care as a right? Yes, again. Do they believe climate change is real? You got to be kidding. Are they tired of the United States of America, the wealthiest country in the history of the world, falling apart at the seams with roads, bridges, water systems, wastewater plants, airports, rails, levees, and dams either failing or at risk of failing? Who isn't? Further, a majority of the American people want comprehensive immigration reform and a criminal justice system that is based on justice, not racism or mass incarceration. Today, what the American people want is not what they're getting. In fact, under Republican leadership in the House, Senate, and White House, they are getting exactly the opposite of what they want. The American people want a government that represents all of us. Instead, they're getting a government that represents the interests and extremist ideology of wealthy campaign contributors. They want environmental policies that combat climate change and pollution and that will allow our kids to live on a healthy and habitable planet. Instead, they're getting executive orders and legislation that push more fossil fuel production, more greenhouse gas emissions, and more pollution. They want a foreign policy that prioritizes peacemaking. Instead, they're getting increased military spending and growing hostility to our long-term democratic allies. They want a nation in which all people are treated with dignity and respect and where we continue our decades-long struggle to end discrimination based on race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, and nation of origin. Instead, they have a president who seeks to win political support by appealing to those very deep-seated prejudices. During the last several years, I've worked hard in Washington, but I've also traveled to 32 states in every region of our country. I've seen the beauty, strength, and courage of our people. I've also seen fear and despair. I've talked to people with life-threatening illnesses in West Virginia who worry about what will happen to them or their loved ones if they lose the health insurance that keeps them alive. I've talked to young immigrants, dreamers in Arizona who are frightened to death about losing their legal status and being deported from the only country they have ever known. I talked to a young single mom in Nevada worried about how she can raise her daughter on $10.45 an hour. I talked to retirees and older workers in Kansas who are outraged that as a result of congressional legislation, they could lose up to 60% of the pensions they paid into and were promised as deferred compensation for a lifetime of hard work. Bernie Sanders, where we go from here.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Tuesday, happy Thanksgiving week. We're going to be taking the rest of the week off, just FYI. So you'll get some really great best of programs, but I hope you have a wonderful and meaningful holiday season. We got a lot to talk about today. Is Democratic leadership missing in action as Donald Trump tightens his grip? Also, China, Canada, and Mexico hit back at Trump's announced plan to hit them all with 25% tariffs. How do we actually bring our jobs back home? What aspect of what Trump is doing actually makes some small amount of sense, and why, and how could it be done and done right? We'll talk about that in the first hour of the program. In the second hour of our program, Trump's border czar is threatening a mayor with jail. Actually, he's threatening multiple mayors with jail. Really? These guys, you know, they're claiming that they're going to play hardball. We'll see. Also, many of the Southern segregation academies that opened up after the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954 are now getting federal funds in a direct slap in the face to the memory of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and his contemporaries. And the hidden history of the American dream, the demise of the middle class, and how to restore our future or rescue our future. My newest book. It just came out last month. I have not yet had an opportunity to really go through it with you. I'm going to take the entire third and just go through the book piece by piece. So you don't have to buy it. You can just listen. I'll share the whole book with you. So I think you're going to find it fascinating. So we've got a lot to talk about today. I want to start out with my op-ed today because it's pretty brutal, and and it's something I've been saying here on this program for a while. In fact, last night I was up in my office writing today's article, which actually I wrote the first draft of over the last weekend. But I was, cleaning it up and tightening it up and stuff. Sometimes it takes me a couple days to finish a piece. And Louise yells up and says, "Joy Reid's doing your article right now." I'm like, "Oh yeah, great." I am so glad that the way that I'm thinking is being echoed by others, or that I'm echoing them. I don't. Great minds think alike, right? It's some of the stuff is just obvious. But my point is twofold. Number one, so much for American democracy and the concept that no man is above the law. Right? There is not one law and not one word in the U.S. Constitution that requires Merrick Garland to order Jack Smith to drop the charges against Donald Trump. Nothing. It's merely a policy written in a letter by Richard Nixon's corrupt Justice Department, whose Director, Attorney General John Mitchell, went to prison for his corruption back when Nixon was being investigated. And it was doubled down on by Bill Clinton's Justice Department, just by coincidence, when Clinton was being investigated for lying under oath about Monica Lewinsky. This policy has no force of law. It's merely policy. It was written by an agency lawyer who was never elected by anybody to anything specifically to protect Nixon and Clinton. And Merrick Garland, who Republican Senator Orrin Hatch suggested Obama should put in as his last Supreme Court justice, Merrick Garland could have easily ignored it. And you know that if the shoe was on the other foot, if you had Donald Trump as president and he was going after Joe Biden, and Joe Biden had just won re-election, that Joe Biden would be in confinement right now. In 1978, in the case Butts versus Economou, the Supreme Court wrote, quote, "No man in this country is so high that he is above the law. No officer of the law may set that law at defiance with impunity. All the officers of the government, from the highest to the lowest, are creatures of the law and are bound to obey it. Except for little Donnie criminal, little Donnie Orangeface. That our nation's highest officer of the law, Merrick Garland, is forcing Jack Smith to allow a convicted and multiple grand jury indicted criminal to go free because he gamed the system through an election is, in my opinion, a crime itself. It's a clear violation of the principles, the foundational principle of Anglo-American justice and politics, the Magna Carta, first signed into law by King John on the plain at Runnymede in 1215. No man is above the law. As Merrick Garland and his Department of Justice obey in advance, America's in a crisis. And here's the big question. Where the hell is Democratic leadership while we're in a crisis? Are you seeing a spokesperson for the Democratic Party? Are you seeing a high-profile Democrat stepping up, standing out, and every single day going on media, national media, radio, television, talk shows, social media, to say, no, this is wrong, or here's what it should be? Instead, last night on Lawrence O'Donnell's show, I was treated to Neil Katyal saying, well, you know, letting Donald Trump go is proof that the system works. What bull? It's proof that the system is corrupted. Now, you know, Neil Katyal has some, problems of his own. I get that. But here's the bottom line. Democracy doesn't die in darkness. It dies in social media and the checkbooks of billionaires. And when democracy's advocates, which today is the Democratic Party, fail to stand up and lead. I mean, right now, all the Democrats, the high-profile Democrats, they've gone quiet. Where's Joe Biden? Has he said a word? No, he pardoned a turkey yesterday. Where's Kamala Harris? Has she said a word? No, she's vacationing in Hawaii. I mean, Bernie Sanders has been out talking, although he doesn't get the kind of media coverage he deserves. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has had a few choice words, mostly about Nancy Mace. Elizabeth Warren has spoken out on a couple of TV shows. Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, the guy who probably is going to be the nominee 4 years from now for president, certainly, has been working on it. Haven't heard a peep. Over this last weekend, I try to read a book every weekend, and this weekend it was How to Stand Up to a Dictator. It's a book by Maria Ressa. She's a Filipina journalist who lived in the United States much of her life, was educated here, she was born in the Philippines, went back to the Philippines, and started Rappler, which is a now banned, maybe it's unbanned now under Bong Bong, I'm not sure. But she kept getting thrown in jail, and by Duterte, the guy, the elected dictator of the Philippines at the time. And she says that the war against democracy in her country was fought, quote, this is from the book, quote, on two fronts, President Rodrigo Duterte's drug war and Mark Zuckerberg's Facebook. She also pointed out that 1 in 24 of Donald Trump's Facebook friends and likes in the 2016 campaign actually came out of the Philippines. They were being paid by American billionaires. And she talks about how the absence of the rule of law online, because Mark Zuckerberg wouldn't enforce anything close to a rule of law on Facebook. Instead, he let Russians exploit it in 2016. and turn the election over to Trump. She says, the absence of the rule in the virtual world is devastating. We live in only one reality, and the breakdown of the rule of law globally was ignited by the lack of a democratic vision for the internet. Yeah. And we're seeing the same thing here in the United States. You know, billionaire Elon Musk turned X into a massive right-wing echo chamber, allegedly spreading lies and Russian propaganda in service of Trump's election. So where is everybody? I mean, during the campaign, you had the Republicans running these ads saying that Kamala Harris cared more about trans prisoners than about you. And the Harris campaign never responded. Just like when George Herbert Walker Bush ran the Willie Horton ad saying that, you know, Michael Dukakis had let a murderer out of prison and he went on to kill somebody, the Dukakis campaign never responded. What's wrong with these Democrats? Where's the leadership? For 4 years, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have been absolutely kicking ass. They have done one of the best jobs of governing, of running this country in my lifetime. But they never bothered to tell anybody about it. Donald Trump ran a crap administration for 4 years. He never got his economic numbers close to where Obama's were, and never even touched Biden's. And yet, every day he was out there bragging about how great his economy was. And when you look at the numbers on the people, you know, on people who voted this year, what you find is that the massive, the overwhelming percentage of people who voted for Donald Trump believed we were in a recession. 69% of all voters in America who pulled the lever for Trump believed that we were in a recession. Now, when you're in a recession, the party in power always loses. They believed the Fox News lies. They believed the Donald Trump lies. Why? Because Joe Biden wasn't out there telling them the truth. Kamala Harris wasn't out there telling them the truth for 4 long years. Yes, we had 106 days of intense campaigning by Harris and Walz, and God bless them. They did a great job given what they had. And, you know, a lot of the blame goes to Joe Biden for, you know, not allowing a primary and pissing away, you know, at least a year that could have been used for campaigning. I get all that. But where's the Democratic leadership now? Where are the Democrats who are going to stand up, step up, speak out, and take on these fascists? I'm not seeing them. I'm not hearing from them. Certainly isn't Jamie Harrison. Apparently not Kamala Harris or Joe Biden. You know, I'd love to hear more from Bernie and AOC and Liz Warren and Sheldon Whitehouse. And, you know, I mean, there's a few people who are, you know, you know, the governor of California, Gavin Newsom. But, you know, there's a few who are willing to speak out. But, hey, let's make this thing happen.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And let's do it now, because after January 20th, it may get real difficult. I'll be right back. And welcome back. Patrick in Salt Lake City. Hey, Patrick, what's on your mind today?
Wow, Tom, I think that introduction to me just being here at this time was monumental. I've never heard it described as the way you did. Democracy doesn't die in darkness. It dies on social media at the pen stroke of billionaires. Tom, you just identified the most important part, but there's a lot to it, and I hope that we'll have a chance to talk more about this after this brief response to your question. But I was a guest on your program many years ago. I'm a muckraking journalist. I'm an independent filmmaker. I made a documentary several years ago that answers most of these questions. But the question that you are asking needs to be framed from this perspective. Corruption births and fuels fascism. And the fascism that we're in the midst of is a hybrid corporate fascism that you know very well, but you are missing an incredibly important point that has to basically be unpacked and somehow penetrate the minds of millions of Americans who don't understand this corruption that has been pretty much our story for the past 14 years, Tom, and there's a reason for that. But ultimately, we have to create what I've created is called the Clean New Deal. I've got a website that's www.thecleannewdeal.com, or .org, I'm sorry. But I can give you all the bullet points, and we don't have enough time to go into it because it's just a quick response to your question about where's the Democratic leadership. Look, the answer to that rhetorical question, Tom, based on what you've been providing us, minus the specific information,
it's not rhetorical,
is that the Democrats have. Well, but the Democrats have been hedged by corrupt. It's a literal. You're right. The Democrats have been hedged by billionaire apparatuses for the last decades. But that's the answer to the question. The problem is corruption. And what we just saw yesterday with Merrick Garland sitting, taking 2 years to get Jack Smith in the game to ultimately, follow the lead of the Supreme Court. And the question was, where was Biden this whole time? Couldn't Biden have been much more proactive 6 months ago to both go on the offensive against SCOTUS, not to mention...
Yeah, try 3.5 years ago.
Elon Musk. Right. But Elon Musk, too. Why did it take so long for mainstream to catch up? It was 2 days before the election, Tom, that Rachel Maddow and the New York Times even questioned who Elon Musk was without the revelations that, and I've been on X for a long time. In fact, somebody from your account followed me on X recently. You can find me at Patrick Level 1 on X. But the bottom line is they have been churning out tens of millions of lies literally per second, Tom, for 6 months. This algorithm on X and what we've seen from fake accounts that are vectors from, let's start with Alex Jones and all of the insanity from him, but through everybody from, Marjorie Taylor Greene does not tweet 24 hours a day, but yet her tweets are 24 hours a day, for example. I could give you so many examples, but I'll just stop right there and give you a chance to respond. It's corruption, Tom.
Yeah. Yeah. Alexei Navalny, I just started reading his autobiography. It's titled Patriot, and it just came out. And his thing was identifying the corruption in the Putin administration. That was his entire thing. Right. He started an anti-corruption organization. And I think you're right, Patrick. And corruption is a word that really has not yet been, high profile in our politics, and it should be. And I think Alexei Navalny, provides us with a good roadmap on how to do that. Patrick, thanks. Thanks for the good work you're doing, and thanks for dropping in and talking with us. It's 22 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. America is suffering from an epidemic of bullying. And one of the things we know is that culture, including bullying, flows from the top down. We've seen studies where when issues of for example, being gay or transgender are being debated in the public, gay and transgender kids in school are more likely to be bullied. When racial issues are being discussed, people of minority races are more likely to be bullied. Well, now we've got a man who has literally built his career on being a bully, Donald Trump, as president, or was president, as candidate. And he is driving this insane bullying campaign and using it as a political weapon across the United States. And it's contagious. It's dangerous. There's an entire article about it over at HartmannReport.com titled America's New Epidemic, A Nation Overrun by Bullies. Check it out.
We've seen the warnings, the lessons are clear. Leaders must lead when the crisis is near. Not with silence, but with action bold. The fight's not won by staying cold. Trump's machine spins lies every day, while truth gets lost in the games they play. It's not the reality, but what people believe, that shapes the choices they choose to weave. Who will fight for America's future? Who will stand for the people's voice? When the darkness comes to claim our rights, who will rise? Who will make the choice? The storm is rising, the shadows grow.
Where are the Democrats? I'm telling you. All right, Donald Trump says he's going to slap 25% tariffs on Mexico, China, and Canada on day one, on January 20th or 21st. And, he posted this on Truth Social yesterday. One of the first executive orders he signs, until such time as there are no more illegal immigrants and there is no more fentanyl, which, of course, ain't going to happen. Now, Mexico has responded. Canada has yet to respond. China has responded. I'll share those responses with you. But I just want to say, I have been saying on this program for 21 years, I've been writing for 40 years, that we need to reverse Reagan's abandonment of tariffs. We have tariffs in the United States. We've got over 20,000 tariffs. Most of them are minimal. Joe Biden added a bunch of tariffs to things. We have a 100% tariff right now on Chinese electric cars, for example. That was Joe Biden's job. So I'm not an opponent of tariffs, and apparently neither are Democrats. But the way that Trump is doing this could produce an absolute screaming disaster. Democrats should have done this. They should have done this right. This deserves a little longer rant, so I'm going to get into it on the other side of the break, and then I'll pick up your calls. So stay with us. It's 27 minutes past the hour. It's your media support group for We the People. I'll be back with that rant. What's going on with the tariffs? How is this going to play out? What's it going to do to you and me? And then your calls right after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And I would add, one of the biggest mistakes that the Harris campaign made was to ridicule Trump's pushing tariffs. Americans want their jobs back.
Pat Mitchell. It's titled Becoming a Dangerous Woman, Embracing Risk to Change the World. This is from the preface titled The Most Dangerous Woman in the Room. Yes, I'll be there. Eve Ensler was calling with an invitation to what she described as the meeting of movements planned for the first week of January 2017. In the wake of a polarizing presidential election in the United States, Eve had decided it was time for activists to come together to shape strategies that would unify and leverage the collective power of a wide range of social justice organizations. Who else is coming, I asked. I'm not releasing the invitation list, Eve replied, but you'll want to be in the room. Indeed, I did want to be in that room, knowing from past experiences that any meeting or event that Eve organized would be meaningful. So I showed up, as the invitation indicated, at a nondescript building in Stone Ridge, New York, and surrendered my cell phone to the smiling young volunteers at the front door. Best to have all communication devices outside the room, was the explanation, which of course heightened my anticipation about what would transpire within the room. I entered a large room and saw Eve standing at the front with folding chairs in a circle. Mingling about the room were some familiar faces, the meeting's other conveners, Kimberly Crenshaw of the African American Policy Forum, Naomi Klein, award-winning author and activist, independent media entrepreneur and journalist Laura Flanders, and Jane Fonda, actor and activist. We were asked to find our seats, and Eve began. "We are living in dangerous times," was her opening line, and such times call for new levels of activism from all the communities represented in this room. Let's begin by identifying who's in the room. One by one, the introductions began. I'm one of the founders of the Women's March. I'm the executive director of 350.org. I run Project South. With each introduction, the level of leadership and activists' credentials became more impressive and, for me, more intimidating. I could feel my anxiety building. How was I going to identify myself? I have no title and was no longer running an organization, having left my CEO position at the Paley Center for Media the previous spring. I could say that I was the CEO of Pat Mitchell Media with its grand total of 2 employees, including myself, but that felt wholly inadequate to explain why I belonged in that room. I mentally rehearsed some other options. I could say I was a lifetime advocate for women, true enough if a little vague. I could list some of my previous titles, but why make a point of being the former anything? I was struggling to come up with how to identify myself in the present, an identity that would hopefully give some indication of why Eve had included me in this circle of activists and leaders. Finally, it was my turn. Before I knew it, I heard myself saying, "I'm Pat Mitchell, and I'm a dangerous woman." I'm not sure exactly what prompted this personal declaration of dangerousness, but I could tell from the looks of surprise that I needed to add a bit more context. At this time in my life, about to turn 75, I continued, I have nothing left to prove, less to lose, and I'm ready to take more risks and to be less politic and polite. As Eve said, these are dangerous times, and dangerous times call for dangerous women. That got a big sisterly yes from Eve and others in the circle, including Jane Fonda, who was sitting across from me, and stood up declaring, "Well, I'm older than my friend Pat, so that makes me even more dangerous." Laughter erupted, of course, and I could sense that others were contemplating exactly what becoming more dangerous to meet the challenges of dangerous times would mean for each of us and for the work we had convened to consider. Certainly, Jane Fonda's life of activism is a textbook case for being bold and brave. During our many years of friendship, I've witnessed her willingness to take risks for a good cause, to speak out and show up, even when it meant personal peril or sacrifice. At 81, she is still on the front lines, campaigning for domestic and restaurant workers' rights, standing with the American Indian communities, protesting natural resource exploitation at Standing Rock, and busier as an actor than ever. In her book, Prime Time, Jane advanced the idea that older women have the potential to become the most powerful population on the planet. She's a great example of how we embrace that potential at every age. My personal potential for becoming dangerous is perhaps more directly linked to my friendship with Eve Ensler. From our first conversation in war-torn Sarajevo in 1998, I've been deeply inspired by her courage and her commitment to do whatever is necessary to end violence against women everywhere. Taking risks comes easier to Eve than to many. Writing and performing the vagina monologues, making it the centerpiece of a global movement, V-Day, to end gender-based violence, is a transformative approach to activism that I feel privileged to have experienced. Yes, I was an activist and woman's advocate before I met Eve, but through my relationship with her and as a board member of the V-Day movement, I've met activists facing dangers every day to create change in some of the most difficult places on earth to be a woman. But until that day, I had not felt dangerous myself. Declaring myself a dangerous woman still feels a bit, well, dangerous. And I readily admit to some second thoughts about declaring it even more widely and boldly as the title of this book. But every day since that convening, I'm discovering more about what being dangerous means in my life and why I believe that it's time for us, women and the men who stand with us, at whatever age or place in life's journey, to embrace risks and engage with renewed passion and collective purpose in making the world a safer place for women and girls. Pat Mitchell, Becoming a Dangerous Woman.
Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out. Keep your ears open here for the mention of...
It started on a quiet farm just before the big day, when Farmer Joe came down the road with his axe and a bale of hay. The turkeys huddled in the barn whisper in their grand plan. We've had enough of stuffing and gravy, time to take a stand. It's the Great Turkey Uprising, feathers in the air. They're marching to the farmhouse with a gobble and a glare. Knives and forks that tremble and pies are in despair. The turkeys are revolting, run for your lives, beware. They stormed the coop with picket signs, no roasting us today. One turkey yelled, we're not your feast, find tofu, it's okay. They hijacked the farmer's tractor and drove it through the shed.
The story goes on from there. I think he'll, oh my. As I said, those songs are all over at HartmannReport.com. I wanted to get back to tariffs. We were talking about tariffs a minute ago, and Donald Trump's promised 25% tariffs on China, Mexico, and Canada, which represents about 60% of our total imports. But I want our jobs to come home. I've been saying this ever since the Reagan Revolution. And I agree with Alexander Hamilton and George Washington and every American president up until the 1980s that tariffs are part of a comprehensive collection of tools that you use to keep American jobs here in the United States. And this is, by the way, not just a jobs issue, it's also a national security issue. We can't build a cruise missile right now without parts from China. That's crazy. But the way to do it is not to just go, 25% tariff until we get fentanyl and illegal limit. It's that's rhetorical. That's a rhetorical flamethrower. That's burning down the barn to try to get a mouse out of the hay, right? I mean, this is just crazy. But we do need to bring our jobs home. We need to bring our products home. I have a friend who got prostate cancer. And he's convinced he got it from a drug that's made in India that was contaminated with a chemical that causes prostate cancer. Excuse me, pancreatic cancer. Thankfully, he survived, actually. But I mean, my dad got bladder cancer from a diabetes drug he was taking that was contaminated in India by a chemical that causes bladder cancer. It was eventually recalled after he was dead. Now, he died of the mesothelioma, but he had 2 cancers at once when he died. This free trade craziness that Thomas Friedman and Bill Clinton and Ronald Reagan and George Herbert Walker Bush talked us into back in the 80s and 90s has just decimated so much of our country. My best friend Jerry Schneiderman, the apartment that he lived in until he died in New York was built by the Ladies Garment Workers Union. Remember the old song, "Look for the union label"? It's you'd have to be a certain age to remember that song, those ads. But the Ladies Garment Workers Union, I think they're still around, but they're a shadow of what they used to be. They used to be a major union. They used to have they basically controlled large parts of New York City. Trump is not going to handle this well. We've had 30 or 40 years of having our jobs shipped overseas. You're not going to reverse that in a week or a month or even in one presidential term. It needs to be done gradually, steadily. It needs to be done with the consent and participation of Congress. It needs to be done in a way that businesses know is not going to be reversed 4 years from now by, President Gavin Newsom or somebody. Meanwhile, Canada and Mexico and China are pushing back. I mean, China, Mexico, first of all, Claudia Sheinbaum, the new progressive president of, she said, we're more than willing to try to cut fentanyl to the United States. We outlawed it here. She says, to one tariff will come another, and soon until we put our common businesses at risk. And so on until she said, we don't produce she's talking about there's just a slaughter going on in Mexico with American-made weapons. And she said, well, we don't produce these weapons. We don't consume this in drugs. Unfortunately, we have the people who are being killed by crime that is responding to the demand for drugs in your country. And, of course, the manufacturing of weapons here in the United States that are being smuggled into Mexico. Scott Bessonette is going to be our Treasury Secretary, assuming he gets confirmed. I don't think he'll have a problem. He's a right-wing billionaire, a major funder of Donald Trump's campaign. He used to work for George Soros. Openly gay guy. Seems like a decent person. Knows what he's talking about. But he says he's gung-ho for tariffs, too. 40% of total U.S. trade would be covered by these tariffs. I said 60% below before I was wrong. It's 40%. Just 3 countries, 40% of all our trade. And he says he's going to do it under the IEEPA, the International Economic Emergency Powers Act. Trump says that. But watch what's going on in Congress. Just last week, there was a new bill submitted in the Senate removing permanent trade relations with China. This happened during the Clinton administration, if my recollection is right, that we granted China most favored nation status. Might have been Bush, but I think it was Clinton. And this legislation has passed the House. Well, actually, there's a similar bill in the House. I'm sorry, it's now in the Senate. It was just dropped. These are Republican bills. In China with 100% tariffs, 100% tariffs. And the equity markets are not freaking out. The stock market is not crashing, which means that Trump is probably going to push this through, and it may well succeed. Now, Scheinbaum down in Mexico says we're going to retaliate. And China's foreign ministry said, quote, the U.S. should not take China's goodwill for granted, and imposing tariffs of 10% on Chinese imports as a punishment for massive amount of drugs, in particular fentanyl, be sent to the United States from China. This is Trump who said that. He said fentanyl is an issue for the U.S. This is the official Chinese position, not our problem. And the 25% tariffs on Canada, this could be a very big deal because it'll crash Canada's economy. 3/4 of all of Canada's exports come to the United States, $600 billion a year worth. Now, Canada would likely retaliate, but they're going to, Trump is going to cause a depression in Canada. Meanwhile, Trump's border czar, Thom Hartmann, I'm going to hold this story for the next hour. I've been talking too long. It's almost 1:45. I want to pick up your phone calls here. Sandra in Omaha, Nebraska. Hey, Sandra, what's on your mind today?
Well, I've been thinking along the same lines of several of your callers and you. To me, it seems like Democrats always approach a competition as Robert's rules. We must always be polite, be considerate, and definitely don't break any rules. Stay in your lane, wait for the starting gun to go, and then run. Right. And the Republicans, it's anything goes. If I can be halfway down the track before the gun goes off and it's still okay, hey, that works for me. Yep. And over and over and over, they've proven rules don't apply to them. Yep. So when election night, 9 o'clock, and they're already declaring it came about, and I thought, that's odd. It seems awfully early to just toss in the towel and say, well, we're done. See ya. And then the Democrats all disappear. And it's like, really? Yeah. No question of, gee, can we get a recount on a couple of these states? And nothing, not a thing. It was like radio silence. Yeah. And to me, it feels almost like, well, there must have been bribes that went out to them, too. It just seems awfully convenient. Well, I think it's entirely possible that between the fact that, number one, Kamala Harris only had 106 days to campaign, number two, there was never a primary, there was never any discussion of the issues, number three, Joe Biden spent 3 years basically hiding in the White House without, coming out and daily bragging about what he was doing like Trump did. Number four, Elon Musk buys Twitter along with Saudi Arabia. Most people don't even realize the Saudis are the second biggest investor in Twitter, and they're just fine with the way Musk is using it as a right-wing springboard. Yeah. A massive propaganda campaign. Then you've got right-wing billionaires putting as much as $20 billion into this election and carpet bombing America with highly deceptive ads. And then in response to that, the Harris campaign never once even talked back to those ads, which is exactly the mistake Michael Dukakis made. And I'm going through a list here. These are I believe, the reasons why Kamala Harris legitimately lost the election. Sure, I'd like to see a recount in some of the states where there's some squirrely stuff. Steve Spoonemore is backing off his bullet ballot theory now. His newsletter yesterday. It's like there's no spine.
Well,
No
I'm not sure it's
spying in
spying.
anyone.
I think that there's just no focus in the appropriate places. And part of the problem is that, about a third of the Democratic Party is still on the take. You've got the Jared Goldens and Josh Gottheimers of the world out there who are, totally beholden to, whether it's, to whoever's crossing their palms with cash, whether it's big industry, whether it's AIPAC, whatever it may be. And the result of that is that the Democratic Party has been neutered, basically. And I want to see the Democrats start standing up, and I want to see them do something about purging their ranks, frankly, particularly now that they have no ranks. I mean, this is what the Republicans did. They said, okay, we're out of power. We're going to get rid of the people who are holding us back, and we're just going to go full steam ahead. Democrats need to do the same. Sandra, thank you for the call. Spot on. Thank you. 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Speaking the truth, the multinational corporations would really rather you didn't know. I'll be right back with your call statements. And welcome back. And let's see here, Steve in Phoenix. Hey, Steve, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom. Thank you for taking the call here. What I'd like to do is just make a few various comments and finish up with a question for you. Merrick Garland is beyond a disaster. That's known for many years. It is a terrible decision. Now, also, this decision not to prosecute a sitting president, this policy, well, a policy is nothing more than an opinion. It's not a law at all. It's just an opinion.
My point.
So it's absolutely nonsense.
Yeah, it is absolutely nonsense. And it's nonsense, by the way, that was put into place to defend Richard Nixon and Bill Clinton when both of them were being investigated by their own Justice Departments who were trying to prevent the investigations. I mean, it's a corrupt opinion, in other words.
It is a corrupt opinion. It shouldn't apply to anybody, and just against Trump and Nixon, Clinton. You got to have justice. Now, another thing, this last election, 25% of eligible voters apparently only voted. I mean, that's another disaster. Yeah. And I'd like to also circle back to, you've commented about Howard Dean. Well, we went to Wisconsin, back home to Wisconsin, and we're in Arizona for 38 years, or 36. Mm-hmm. Anyways, for vacation. 2 days after the election, and our driver, he's 73 now, but he worked. He's his little hobby here for him. He took us to the airport and stuff. He worked on Howard Dean's campaign here in Arizona back in, I think it was 2004 or something like that.
Oh, really?
And he said Howard was a really wonderful man.
He is. I know Howard Dean. He genuinely is a wonderful man. He's a decent human being and a hell of a good doctor, by the way.
I was just going to bring that up. And with his 50-state strategy, I fully endorse right here. I want to endorse him to be the head of the DNC.
I've been saying that for 2 weeks.
You bet.
We need Howard Dean back.
Lastly, what's that, Tom?
We need Howard Dean back.
Yes, sir. Big time. Lastly, Tom, I got a question for you. What is NATO going to do? How are we going to support Ukraine after January 20th or whatever it is when Donald takes office? Right. What do you think?
Worst case scenario, best case scenario is Donald Trump decides, he's not going to run for re-election, or he doesn't need Vladimir Putin, or he doesn't care what blackmail Putin's got over him because, hey, he's in charge now. And he decides that he's going to continue defending Ukraine. That's the best case scenario. I think it's unlikely, but it's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is Trump not only stops all aid to Ukraine, but also essentially tells NATO that either we're pulling out or we're not going to honor Article 5 of the Ukraine agreement, or of the NATO agreement, excuse me. At that point, Putin takes Ukraine brutally and then starts pushing, and then tries to take Moldova. And starts pushing on the borders of Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. At that point, NATO has to make a choice. Are the European countries without U.S. help going to risk engaging in a nuclear war with Russia, or are they going to let Putin take a couple thousand square miles of Europe? And that's a World War III scenario. And once that happens, by the way, once the world gets to that level of precariousness, China will invade Taiwan instantly. And then you genuinely have a world war going on. And if Trump stays out of it, you're going to have a world war where this time the Nazis are going to win. So that's my worst case scenario. Steve, I got to run. Thanks for the call. We'll be right back. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Between 40 years of Ronald Reagan's neoliberalism destroying the American middle class and all the just horrors of January 6th and the Trump presidency, America's waking up, and that's a really good thing. There's actually, some books coming out about this. Mine, The Hidden History of Democracy. Neil Howe's The Fourth Turning is here. And it looks like a moment of American renaissance is upon us, if our media doesn't screw it up, which raises the question, can we have democracy and Fox News? Can the two coexist? Like, when Fox News runs chyrons saying that essentially Joe Biden is a wannabe dictator who's throwing Trump in jail because he's his political opponent. There's a whole rant about this and an in-depth analysis of what can we do with regard to repairing our media here in the United States over at HartmannReport.com. I think you'll find it interesting. Check it out.
Every day's an opportunity to do something good in your family, in your community, in your...
Welcome back. 51 minutes past the hour. Picking up your calls here. Marty in Wixom, Michigan. Hey, Marty, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. By the way, I really like those little musical interludes you put on. That's a great idea.
Oh, thank you. Louise is having so much fun with them, although I'm telling you, she's probably spending 6 or 7 hours a day doing these things. It's incredible. But
I'll bet.
Some real creative
I really
work.
enjoy them. Well, basically, I just wanted to salute your Hartmann report today about Democratic leadership being missing in action. I agree completely, and I'd like to add some emphasis to that. I personally am absolutely stunned and horrified at what's happening in our country with this juggernaut of the Trump dictatorship. I'm in my 70s. I've followed politics closely for over 50 years. I've often worked in legislative policy arena at both the federal and state level, and I've literally never seen anything like this. I mean, we're in a space that was unimaginable 10 years ago.
Yeah.
The open and obvious economic corruption, the clear violation of assumed core values like no one is above the law, the total failure of the Fourth Estate news media to do their job. And now we have the looming dictatorship to take over the federal government. And I totally agree with you. I don't see any response from the Democratic Party leadership that's commensurate with the urgency of the moment.
Yep.
And in that regard, I have 4 specific examples of what Biden and the Dems should be doing. First, they should be confirming every last judicial and regulatory agency nomination pending in the Senate.
I think they're working on that.
And by the way,
although Dick Durbin, I think, is still honoring blue slips, which is just another friggin' wimp. Anyhow, back to you.
I just heard yesterday that Chuck Schumer cut a deal where he's going to give up on 4 key federal appeals court judges. I mean, that's just outrageous. We can't be doing that.
Oh, jeez.
But anyway, the second is they should be completing and releasing any remaining executive branch reports and judicial case summaries in the pipeline.
Yeah.
Finish those up and get them out publicly.
Particularly about Trump's corruption.
Absolutely. I mean, there's lots of things going on right now in the executive branch and EPA and so forth. They need to get those out.
Yep.
Third, they need to release or assure public accessibility to all important government data sets. There's lots of stuff in there, things like energy production and costs, environmental emissions, crime data, and so forth. Anything that might be useful in establishing a baseline of conditions before Trump takes over and censors all that stuff. They need to make sure
as he did 4 years
available.
ago.
That's right.
Or 8 years ago.
And finally, they should be going through Project 2025 line by line to see what Trump MAGA will seek to do and look for specific actions that could delay and obstruct their efforts.
Yeah.
Or information that could be released now to expose what they're going to be trying to do. I mean, there are lots of things that executive branch agencies can do to jam up people who have bad intent when they take over. And they need to be making this a priority.
Yeah.
This is an unprecedented attack on our democracy, and it needs all hands on deck to blunt this effort.
Yeah, I'm with you, Marty. I'm 100% with you. Spot on. Thank you very much. So well said. Dennis in Aptos, California. Hey, Dennis, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, really quick. You said something yesterday that was kind of incorrect. Hungary was already a member of the Axis in 1938. Horthy, the fascist dictator there, had invited Hitler to the country to sign that pact.
So Hitler did not invade Hungary?
Well, I'm going to put it this way. In March of 1944, Soviet troops entered Hungary. That's when German troops came into Hungary to bail out the Hungarian troops.
I didn't know that. Thank you, Dennis, for the history lesson.
Yeah, real quick. I just want to mention a few people. Crockett, the Texas representative.
Jasmine.
She's stepping up to the plate.
Yep.
Chris Murphy is, I believe.
Yep.
I'd like to see Chris Murphy running for president. I would think that would be a good idea. And for Christ's sakes, I don't know when the Democratic leadership is going to learn that you can have negative ads. And I already told you, the one I would have been running on those NFL games would have been the one of the cop getting squeezed. I would have had empty shelves in stores being shown in, February, March, April 2020.
Yep.
I would have had, 500,000 killed by Trump's COVIDiocy. I would have had all that stuff.
Yep.
And you know what? You're telling the truth. You're not lying, because when the Republicans go negative, they're lying. And I had to tell somebody that on the chat box yesterday on the Randy Rhoads show, who said, "Oh, well, we can't play. We have to play fair." No, we don't. They don't play fair. Right. You fight fire with fire.
Yeah.
For criminy sake, that's why we lose.
Yeah, I'm with you, Dennis.
And it's about time that we grew a spine. Most Democratic people throughout the nation were pissed off at our own party. Yeah. Because they didn't fight hard enough.
I completely agree. We need Franklin Roosevelt or Lyndon Johnson again, or Bernie Sanders. But, sadly, I wish Bernie was 20 years younger. But AOC is, I think, this generation's Bernie. Dennis, thank you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
When Donald Trump declared he would...
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at ThomHartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at ThomHartmann.com. So check them all out at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com.
book for the Thom Hartmann Book Club today is A Nation Forged by Crisis, A New American History by Jay Sexton. And I'm reading from the introduction. This is page 9. The quest for national security and global power, America's shifting position in the international economy, and fluctuations in immigration have made the United States the nation that it is today. Americans' foreign relations have been conditioned its history not only in their cumulative effects over the long haul, but also as a result of their volatility. In periods of crisis, America's position in the world has lurched in unexpected directions. For as inexorable as the rise of the United States appears in retrospect, there have been contingent moments in which the very existence of our nation was up for grabs. This is the essence of crisis. The world turned upside down, the known replaced by the unknown, panic reigning as people struggle to maintain their balance and shifts in the very ground beneath their feet. It came with a speed and ferocity that left men dazed, New York Times correspondent Elliot Bell wrote of Wall Street's catastrophic collapse in October of 1929. Quote, the market seemed like an insensate thing that was wreaking a wild and pitiless revenge upon those who thought to master it, end quote. Crises are contagious, spreading like viruses from one realm to another. It's not without reason that the word crisis was associated with medical conditions and health scares in the 19th century. Each of the periods under consideration in this book were less a singular crisis than a set of interlinked crises. A political crisis could trigger an economic panic, which in turn could intensify social conflict, and so on. As these pandemics spread through the body politic, crisis itself was normalized, becoming an almost accepted characteristic of an age. Just as foreign crises have spread to the United States, domestic ones have spilled across its borders, unsettling foreign countries and peoples, as well as reconfiguring America's connections to the world. Consider the fateful winter of secession that followed the 1860 election of Abraham Lincoln. The crisis over slavery that divided the Union into warring sections that led to a series of sharp reversals in America's position in the global system. The foreign capital that had rushed into the roaring American economy in the preceding decades suddenly began to flee. Indeed, more capital left the United States in 1860 to 1862 than came into it. Also a once-in-a-century occurrence. One of the world's most valuable commodities and America's largest exports, Southern cotton, was confined to the ports of the Confederacy as a result of Richmond's ill-fated diplomatic strategy, leading to unemployment and social unrest in the British textile town of Lancashire. The most unexpected reversal was how the national security that the United States had attained after the war against Mexico in the 1840s was suddenly imperiled, with European powers encroaching once again upon the Western Hemisphere. Meanwhile, the Confederate emissaries across the Atlantic were in search of alliance with Britain. Our country, Secretary of State William Seward lamented in early 1861, after having expelled all European powers from the continent, now threatened to relapse into an aggravated form of its colonial experience, and like India, Turkey, China, and Italy, become the theater of transatlantic intervention and rapacity. A wider view of American history that looks beyond the nation's borders brings into focus not only the migration patterns, economic flows, and international rivalries that have connected the United States to the world, but also those rare moments in which the very existence of the nation was in question. Perhaps none was more pregnant with implications than the autumn of 1877, when the fate of the Patriots' bid for independence hung in the balance. Having proclaimed their independence to the world the previous 4th of July, their cause had stalled on the battlefield and in the diplomatic courts of the old world. I think the game is pretty near up, Washington privately confessed at year's end. To accomplish their independence is not quite so easy as to declare it, the British philosopher Jeremy Bentham haughtily remarked. But then a series of events forever changed the course of modern history. The stunning Patriot victory at the Battle of Saratoga in October, the drafting of the Articles of Confederation in November that, for all its limitations, further demonstrated the political resolve of the Americans. And most of all, the alliance signed with France in February 1778, which provided the Patriots with the resources, military assistance, and naval power that ultimately tipped the scales in their favor. There are comparable Saratoga moments in other crises in U.S. history, as we shall see. These contingent moments played out in their own distinctive ways, but are joined by a common denominator that has been curiously forgotten in our age of U.S. global power. Foreign states and people have played decisive roles in the critical moments of American history. As we make our way through our own era of global instability, In an unprecedentedly interconnected world, there's perhaps no more important lesson from the past to keep in mind. Crisis may beget crisis, Franklin Roosevelt said, as his administration transitioned from battling the Great Depression to entering the Second World War. But the progress underneath does not wholly halt. It does go forward, end quote. Like so many of Roosevelt's public statements, this one reveals the truth even as it conceals others. The United States came out on the other side of its greatest crises as a stronger and more efficiently organized nation, as Roosevelt suggested. The process of mobilizing resources to counter threats catalyzed innovations in political economy, such as the creation of a national financial system during the Civil War, and the economic reforms of the New Deal. The book is A Nation Forged by Crisis by Jay Sexton.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Thanks for sticking around for the second hour of our program. Donald Trump's nominee for border czar, Thom Hartmann, is going after Denver's mayor, Mike Johnson, no relation to the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Denver Mayor Johnson says that he is not going to order his police department to cooperate with ICE in, kicking in the doors of people in Hispanic neighborhoods and demanding to see their papers. Not going to do it. Mike Johnson, Denver Mayor Mike Johnson, is not the only mayor to have said things to this effect, but he's the one that Thom Hartmann decided to pick on over on Fox News yesterday. He said, this is what our upcoming border czar had to say. He said, and I quote, "President Trump has a mandate from the American people. We got to secure this country." Well, number one, he won the election, but he has no mandate. He didn't even get a majority of the votes. He lost altogether, the last two times he ran by 3 and 7 million votes. This time he just squeaked by with almost a majority of the votes, but not quite. That's not a mandate. That's a squeaker of an election. So anyhow, Sean Hannity asked Mr. Hartmann, "So, will you be going into Colorado, Illinois, New York, California? Are you going to uphold the law of the land? That's your commitment. Doesn't matter what these elected politicians threaten or say they're going to do." Hartmann says, "We're going to enforce the law, period, and they're not going to stop us." I guess it's going to make for entertaining television, which is probably, and lots and lots of readership for publications like the Washington Post and the New York Times, which is probably why they were cheerleading for a second Trump presidency for the last year. But what's it going to do to America? Well, of course, the editor of the New York Times, I believe his name is Joe Kahn, famously said, well, that's or words to the effect of, that's a partisan issue. We don't do partisan issues. Defending democracy is a partisan issue. We'll leave that to the Democrats, I guess, because they're the party that wants to defend democracy. We're just going to report on the Republican fascists as if they were just, Republicans. My words, not his, obviously. Meanwhile, ProPublica, one of the last investigative journalist organizations out there, I have started, a monthly $25 donation. It's not a lot. I'm not a rich guy. I make a good living, but I give to a lot of groups. There's a gay and lesbian support group here in Portland that I support. There's a homeless shelter here that I support. But anyway, ProPublica is worthy of your support. ProPublica.org, and they're going to be doing fundraisers over the next couple of weeks. I guarantee you. I don't know this for a fact, but it always happens, in nonprofits. But they've been doing some just absolute kick-ass investigative journalism. I mean, just remarkable stuff. I think ProPublica is one of the reasons that the Republicans want to pass a law saying that the Secretary of the Treasury can strip nonprofit status from an organization just because he thinks that they're too friendly with terrorists, however you define that. Republicans define terrorists as people who support abortion rights, by the way. So the most recent piece that they published, this was published on Sunday, day before yesterday, is titled "Segregation Academies Across the South Get Millions in Taxpayer Dollars." And I'll just share a few choice sentences from this with you because it's pretty mind-boggling. First of all, you'll remember what happened. In 1954, the Supreme Court unanimously ruled in the Brown versus Board of Education ruling that they were reversing Plessy versus Ferguson, the 1898 law that established separate but equal, that said that if black people have facilities that are roughly equivalent to white facilities, segregation does not harm them, and therefore, we can have an apartheid society. We'd been an apartheid society from our founding, but this put it into law, the Plessy versus Ferguson decision in 1898. And so in 1954, in Brown v. Board, the Supreme Court basically overturned their own 1898 decision. And the result was just an explosion in the South. Prince George's County shut down their schools for, as I recall, 5 years. Virginia shut down most of their schools. Maryland shut down most of their schools. Just absolute refusal. There was a follow-up Supreme Court decision that said that you must proceed with all due haste, which was interpreted to mean, oh, we can take decades. But the primary response was that people like Bob Jones and Jerry Falwell and other right-wing, white supremacist, hateful, bigoted preachers opened what they called Christian academies, but they were really, more correctly called segregation academies. In other words, they were private schools for white kids only. Or occasionally they'd let in a black kid just so they could say that they were integrated, but you get the point. And these things have been operating ever since 1955. And now, because of these voucher programs that are popping up in red state after red state, these segregation academies are getting millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in state funds. They're on a sugar high right now. Now, the thing that is mostly keeping black people out of them right now is that in these states, particularly in the southern states, you got a lot of poor black people, and these segregation academies typically charge between $10,000 and $20,000 a year for tuition. The voucher in North Carolina is $7,400 a year. So, if you're a poor family, particularly a poor black family, and you got a $7,400 voucher, but you can't come up with the additional, $3,000 or $13,000 necessary to pay a year's tuition for your kid. That's assuming you only have one kid in school. You're SOL. You're just going to have to go to the public schools. And what this does is it basically ghettoizes the public schools. They get filled with poor people, and they get filled with kids who couldn't pass the entrance exams, as it were, at these segregation academies because they have learning disabilities. And so the public schools end up, having a far more difficult job educating, a much more expensive job, at the same time that their funds are being cut because the money is now going to the segregation academies. So this is what ProPublica wrote. Jennifer Berry Hawes and Molly Simon were the authors of this. Private schools across the South that were established for white children during desegregation are now benefiting from tens of millions in taxpayer dollars flowing from rapidly expanding voucher-style programs. In North Carolina alone, they write, we identified 39 of these segregation academies that are still operating. Of these, 20 schools reported student bodies that were at least 85% white. Those 20 academies, all founded in the 60s and 70s, brought in more than $20 million from the state of North Carolina in the past 3 years alone. None reflect the demographics of their communities. Few even came close. For example, in a county that is only 40% white, Northampton County on the Virginia border, Northeast Academy, a small Christian school, has an enrollment that's 99% white. They're in a 40% white community. Last school year, the school received $438,000, almost half its total reported tuition. So we're subsidizing white families who don't want their kids to go to school with black kids. Vouchers play, these are all my words, now back to reading. Vouchers play a similar role at Lawrence Academy, an hour drive south. It has never reported black enrollment higher than 3% in a county whose population hovers around 60% black. Further south, Pungo Christian Academy has received voucher money every year since 2015. It's 98% white enrollment in a county that's only 65% white. And again, how do they do this? Well, this is, white racists running Republican states, in this case, North Carolina. Now, I realize North Carolina has a Democratic governor, but they have a supermajority Republican legislature that can even overturn the Republican governor's vetoes. By the way, they're trying to strip the governor and most of the senior state offices of all of their power, transferring that power to a handful of Republican elected officials and the legislature itself. Keep an eye on that one, too.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's amazing stuff. So what's on your mind? I'll pick up your calls right after the break at 16 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Robert in Austin, Texas. Hey, Robert, what's up?
Yes, Tom, long-time listener, first-time caller.
Thank you.
And Medicare Advantage has thrown their lot in with criminals.
Explain.
I've received calls, and, for the last month or so, we've all received calls from our towns, like Austin, Texas. I'm from Chicago and Wisconsin. I'm also half Norwegian, but I didn't receive calls from Norway, but I got calls from Wisconsin, Chicago, and Austin. I picked them up, and then they tried to sell me Medicare Advantage.
Of course.
Now then, starting Friday, I received calls from, in this order, my bank, my doctor, and my trash collector. And the way it works is when you answer these calls, there's a moment of silence. A telemarketing room, they're looking for what call to take, and then they pick up. So you hear the call begins with a moment of silence, and then they try to sell you Medicare Advantage.
Your bank tried to sell you Medicare Advantage?
No, that's what I thought. No, this is, don't you see the pattern?
No. What am I missing?
Oh, okay. No, okay, so the pattern where the pattern is that we all get calls for trying to sell us Medicare Advantage. And then for the last month, I am sure not only I have been receiving calls from the places I've lived, the towns I've lived in, and then there's the same delay, and then they come on and try and sell you Medicare Advantage. And then since Friday, I've gotten calls from my bank. In other words, the bank name appeared on the call when the call came in, and when I answered the call, there was silence, and then someone tried to sell me Medicare Advantage.
Oh, they're spoofing your bank, and they're spoofing your old hometown. I get it.
And before that, your hometowns, and before that, and after the bank, in this order, my doctor and my trash collector. And so
they spoofed your doctor and your trash collector too? Holy cow, somebody's got a hold of your information.
Yes, they have the names of my bank and doctor and trash collector. I called the doctor's office back and asked if they had hackers. Nobody knew they had hackers, so I thought about it more, and then I realized they've hacked into me.
Yeah.
Not one, but
have you signed up for any of these?
Listen, Tom. Tom, listen, I've received 15 of these calls in the last...
No, I get it, Robert. Have you signed up with any of these financial services where they say that they're going to help you out? You know, like Rocket Money will help you find subscriptions. Just give us access to your credit cards.
No. It's really the Medicare Advantage salesman. I forgot the names.
But how did they hack you, Robert?
I forgot the names of the What?
How did they hack you?
I don't know.
So, have you signed up with any services where you gave them access to your credit card records?
No. I'm on original Medicare, and I have a Medigap supplement.
Right. Yeah. Huh. I have no idea. Then I'll tell you what I do on my phone is I've got it set so if that person calling is not in my contacts, my phone doesn't ring. And if it's an important call, they can leave a message and I'll call them back. And I recommend you do the same, Robert. But yeah, the Medicare Advantage scam guys, there's so much money to be made. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry. They're merciless. Robert, thank you for the call. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So a lot of people are wondering, why is it in America that we can't have nice things? Why don't we have, the same things every other democracy has? Every other democracy in the world has a national health care system of some form, and everybody is covered. We don't. We've got 27 million uninsured people and over 100 million underinsured people. Why is that? Why is it that every other country in the world offers college education very inexpensively, if not for free, and for here you go to debt? Why is it that we've got our public schools crumbling and other countries are doing well? Why is it that we've got Medicare being taken apart by this Medicare Advantage scam and nobody will do anything about it? Well, it turns out the reason why it boils down to one thing, one Supreme Court decision, Citizens United, legalizing the bribery of our politicians. There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. I think you're going to find it very, very useful. Check it out.
Set, the candles glow, the autumn breeze begins to show. But more than harvest, more than feast, we're thankful for the fight that won't cease, for every voice that won't back down, for hands that build, for love unbound. We gather here with hearts so true. Give our thanks for me and you.
And thanks to you for being with us, for supporting our program, for sharing our program with other people. It's truly appreciated. So, what's on your mind today? Jerome in Reno, Nevada. Hey, Jerome, what's up?
Hey, Tom, thanks for taking my call.
My pleasure.
Hey, I wanted to expound on what you opened up your program with, because, most of the Democrats, like myself, will still vote Democrat, but we're just so upset that they just don't do anything. They complain and complain. Trump ran on no taxing tips. Democrats have been wanting to do that for so long, but they never bring it up.
Yeah, Democrats fought it when Reagan started enforcing taxes on tips.
And on Social Security.
Yep.
But did they ever follow up and keep trying to do anything about it?
No.
No, they just let it go. Just like Louis DeJoy, they let him stay in there.
Well, Democrats didn't let him stay in there. That's a little more complex argument, but keep going.
And then Kamala Harris, she's on Fox News, and they ask her, they said, well, why is it that Trump's got 60% of the voters who are favoring him? And what does she respond by saying? Oh, no one said it was going to be easy. That was your opportunity to say, something? The reason these people are voting for Trump is because of all the misinformation and the lies coming from this network.
Exactly.
But she wouldn't stand up and say that, and none of them do that. If you listen to those Republicans, whenever they have an agenda, every time they get in the front of a microphone, any of them, they all say the same thing. And the Democrats, that's all you got to do. It'd be great if we had a channel like Fox, but every time you get in front of a microphone and they say, well, we want to talk about immigration, that's what the interviewer wants to say, say, okay. And then when they let you speak, say, you know what the problem is the economy. And you just go off on it. You don't have to answer their question because the Republicans don't.
Nope. Just take a lesson from Bernie. He's the master at that.
Yeah, and that's all they got to do. But you think they would do that? Nope. And that's why a lot of programming on MSNBC fell after the election. We're just so sick and tired of them complaining about it and not doing anything.
I had to turn Lawrence's show off last night because he had Neil Katyal on there going, oh, yeah, well, dropping the charges against Trump just shows that the system works, and we should all be pleased that the system... That's just complete horse crap.
Well,
I mean, I was so disgusted. I couldn't watch it any longer. And I'm a big fan of Lawrence O'Donnell, but holy cow.
Me too. But Merrick Garland, Biden, why did you leave him in there? You should have got rid of him after the first year.
Yeah,
when
he shouldn't have been put in there in the first place.
You should have got rid of him. I thought it was a good thing. I thought he was going to go after him, but he didn't.
No. Well, you know, he was Orrin Hatch's pick for the Supreme Court. Obama went to Orrin Hatch, the very conservative Republican senator from Utah, and said, you know, okay, I've got this opening here, and I've just got a few months before the end of my term. I need to replace, somebody here. I think it was Ruth Bader Ginsburg. He said, and who would you suggest? And Orrin Hatch said Merrick Garland. I mean, you know, Merrick Garland was the pick of one of the most conservative Republicans in the United States Senate. And when Joe Biden picked him up for Attorney General, my jaw hit the floor. I'm like, what are you doing? You need to get somebody who's a fighter. You need to get somebody you just had a president of the United States break the law and try to overthrow our country. And instead of putting somebody in like Sheldon Whitehouse, who would have pinned his ass to the wall, he put in Merrick Garland, Mr. Casper Milquetoast. Jerome, I got to run, but thank you for the call. It just pisses me off. Anyhow, but I'm generally in good spirits. I'll return to that shortly. What's on your mind? I'll pick up your calls right after the break.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's a good thing we have a long weekend to kind of let it all out, recover. I'll be back with you on the other side of this break.
In the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Ezra Klein's new book, Why We're Polarized. This is from the introduction, and it's a couple pages into it. I'm starting out here. I have found that American politics is best understood by braiding two forms of knowledge that are often left separate: the direct on-the-ground insights shared by politicians, activists, government officials, and other subjects of my reporting, and the more systemic analyses conducted by political scientists, sociologists, historians, and others with the time, methods, and expertise to study American politics at scale. On their own, political actors often ignore the incentives shaping their decisions, and academic researchers miss the human motivations that drive political decision-making. Together, however, they shine bright light on how and why American politics works the way it does. There's much awry in American politics, and I won't in this book attempt to catalog all of it. But I've come to believe the master story, the one that drives almost all divides and most fundamentally shapes the behavior of participants, is the logic of polarization. That logic, put simply, is this: to appeal to a more polarized public, political institutions and political actors behave in more polarized ways. As political institutions and actors become more polarized, they further polarize the public. This sets off a feedback cycle. To appeal to a yet more polarized public, institutions must polarize further. When faced with yet more polarized institutions, the public polarizes further, and so on. Understanding that we exist in relationship with our political institutions, that they are changed by us and we are changed by them, is the key to this story. We don't just use politics for our own ends. Politics uses us for its own ends. There are many different types of polarization possible, and I'll discuss some of them later in the book, but the locus of polarization I'll discuss is on political identity. And that requires saying a few words about a term that should be very useful in American politics, but that has become almost useless: identity politics. A core argument of this book is that everyone engaged in American politics is engaged in identity politics. This is not an insult, and it's not controversial. We form and fold identities constantly, naturally. Identity is present in politics in the way gravity, evolution, or cognition is present in politics. That is to say, it is omnipresent in politics because it is omnipresent in us. There is no way to read the literature on how humans form and protect their personal and group identities, literature I will survey in this book, and believe that any of us is immune. It runs so deep in our psyches, so activated so easily by even weak cues and distant threats, that it is impossible to speak seriously about how we engage with one another without discussing how our identities shape that engagement. Unfortunately, the term identity politics has been weaponized. It is most often used by speakers to describe politics as practiced by members of historically marginalized groups. If you're black and you're worried about police brutality, that's identity politics. If you're a woman and you're worried about the male-female pay gap, that's identity politics. But if you're a rural gun owner decrying universal background checks as tyranny, or a billionaire CEO complaining that high tax rates demonize success, or a Christian insisting on nativity scenes in public squares, well, that's just good old-fashioned politics. With a quick sleight of hand, identity becomes something that only marginalized groups have. The term identity politics in this usage obscures rather than illuminates. It's used to diminish and discredit the concerns of weaker groups by making them look self-interested, special pleading in order to clear the agenda for the concerns of stronger groups, which are framed as more rational, proper topics for normal political debate. But in wielding identity as a blade, we have lost it as a lens, blinding ourselves in a bid for political advantage. We're left searching in vain for what we refuse to allow ourselves to see. All politics is influenced by identity. Those identities are most powerful when they are so pervasive as to be either invisible or uncontroversial. American is an identity. So too is Christian. When politicians, including the irreligious, end speeches with "God bless America," it's not because they're making an appeal to a higher power, but because they're making an appeal to our bedrock identities. If you don't believe me, ask yourself why there are so few open atheists or even agnostics in national politics. This does not mean that politics is an equation solved by locating identity. Identity shapes our worldview, but it does not mechanistically decide it. And while we often speak of identity as a singular, it is always a dizzying plural. We have countless identities, some of them in active conflict with each other, others lying dormant until activated by threat or fortune. Much that happens in political campaigns is best understood as a struggle over which identities voters will inhabit come election day. Will they feel like workers exploited by their bosses, or heartlanders dismissed by coastal elites? Will they vote as patriotic traditionalists offended by NFL players who kneel during the national anthem, or as parents worried about the climate their children will inhabit? What we are often fighting over in American politics is group identity and status, fights that express themselves in debates over policy and power, but cannot be truly reconciled by either. Health policy is positive-sum, but identity conflict is zero-sum. The book Why We're Polarized by Ezra Klein.
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. Our podcast, The Hartmann Report, is absolutely free and available wherever fine podcasts are available. And the entire 3-hour podcast is available over at thomhartmann.com. So back in 1933, when Franklin Roosevelt became president, we were in the depths of the Great Depression. He raised the top income tax rate on billionaires from 25% to 90%. The ultra-rich were screaming, and here's what he had to say.
A number of my friends who belong in the very high upper bracket have suggested to me on several occasions of late that if I am re-elected president, they will have to move to some other nation because of high taxes here. Now, I will miss them very much.
He just took it right to them, right? Now, what came out of that was the world's largest and fastest growing and first major middle class. We can do this again. We just have to raise taxes on rich people. It's pretty straightforward. There's a whole article about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out.
In the heart of every nation, where freedom's flame ignites, there's a beacon shining brightly in the darkest nights.
Welcome back. 35 minutes past the hour. Picking up your calls here. Larry in Los Angeles. Hey, Larry, what's on your...
Tom, can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Tom, I want to appeal to you this morning. This is a perfect time for us to seize the day. When I finish this call with you, I pledge to call Bernie, and I pledge to call AOC to appeal to them to fill the void, this vacuum that we're going through right now, this vacuum of leadership. And I want to ask you, what do you think about having 1,000 of your listeners do the same thing? And lastly, Tom, just give us the DC switchboard number and say a word about Judge Merchan before we finish up here too.
Well, Judge Merchan finds himself, caught between a rock and a hard place. He's got a conviction, and it's in state court, but he's got this Justice Department policy, breathing down his neck, and he's also got, the Trump Justice Department promising retribution. I would not want to be in his situation. I have no advice for him. He knows what's the best thing to do. I would add to your list Gavin Newsom in California. Call the governor's mansion. I don't have the phone number for the California governor's mansion, but you can easily find it online. The number for Congress is 202-224-3121, 202-224-3121. And you can, just if you don't know who represents you in the House of Representatives, give them your zip code. They'll tell you. If you don't know who represents you in your state as your state senators, you have 2 of them, unless you live in D.C. Give them your state, and they'll tell you who they are, and then they'll just connect you directly with their offices. And I encourage you not to call more than once a week, and make your messages very, very short, because you're going to be talking to an intern, generally speaking, who simply has a spreadsheet, and it's like, okay, 1 call about abortion, pro or con, 1 call about climate, pro or con, 1 call about, whatever. And so, you don't need to take up more than 30 seconds of their time at the most. Don't try to engage them in a conversation. Don't try to argue with them. Just tell them what you think. And particularly if you're a constituent, if you live in their state. If you don't live in their state, many of them won't even take your call. Some of them will refer you to their website. Some of them block, calls that are not from zip codes in their states. But most people who are in leadership will take your call. I would also call Chuck Schumer's office, and I would also call Dick Durbin's office and encourage them to stand strong. Hakeem Jeffries in the House of Representatives. All of them need to be hearing from us. Great point, Larry. Thank you for calling and making it. Dwayne in Petaluma, California. Hey, Dwayne, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. About the Trump's tariff suggestion, I think the solution is something you just mentioned a few minutes ago, is Roosevelt's 90% tax. And I would put a differential tax rate on companies that import goods, 90%, and those that manufacture goods, 20%. Mm-hmm. And that would be the Democrats' suggestion, because I don't know what the Chinese would say to that, and I don't know what the Republicans could do about that if that was what we proposed to do 2 years from now.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah, or just giving American manufacturers preferential tax treatment. That is actually included in the CHIPS Act. along with outright subsidies, literally, billions and billions of dollars. I don't know if it's over 100 billion, but it's a lot of billions of dollars in subsidies. You're thinking the same way Joe Biden is thinking here, Dwayne. And
let's make up the money by taxing importers.
Yeah.
And let the Chinese figure out how to, they can deal with tariffs. But what do they do about our differential tax rate?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Nothing.
I would say there's a similar debate around the border. This one debate about how do you do tariffs. Again, Democrats have dropped the ball. They've been whining that, tariffs are a tax on consumers. At the same time, Joe Biden has been putting on tariffs, right? So, Democrats just need to tell the damn truth about tariffs and say, yes, Trump is right and has been right for, 12 years on this issue. He's just doing it wrong. He's doing it in a way that's going to hurt America, not help America. Or he may do it in a way that actually helps America over the long term, but hurts America over the short term. It doesn't need to be done stupidly, but he's, threatening to do it stupidly. And, right now, GM's stock is down 8%, Ford's is down 2%, and Stellantis, Chrysler is down 5%. Because of these tariffs, because they're all manufacturing overseas. Well, damn it, bring your job, bring your manufacturing home. Just because he's Donald Trump doesn't mean he's always wrong. And when the Harris campaign kind of took that position, I thought they were shooting themselves in the foot. I grew up in Michigan. We studied tariffs when I was in elementary school, in like 4th, 5th, 6th grade civics class. How does government work? We learned about tariffs. I don't know if that was universal across the United States, but I can tell you in the Rust Belt, in the industrial Midwest, everybody knew what a tariff was. Everybody knew what a tariff was.
Well, after seeing how Clinton lost what turned into the Rust Belt, I would make a suggestion for the Democrats, and if they want me to be voting, they should put ranked choice voting in their primary.
Well, that's
and let us
that too.
Let us.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense to be voting as to which of the multimillionaires I want to endorse if I don't have ranked choice voting where I can at least choose the ones I want.
Yeah, which would be a good thing. And that's something that the party could do internally. You're absolutely right.
I would love to see them still. This is 14-3 Dwayne, and I still haven't given up that somebody had the guts to do something about 14-3.
Okay, you got it.
I will say goodbye with that. Okay. Thank you very much for being there.
Thank you, Dwayne. And just to finish that point that I started just a moment ago, there's an analogy to this. I have been talking about tariffs here most of the morning because that's the thing that's in the news. But immigration, it's the same issue, right? Donald Trump is right that at a certain level, high levels of undocumented people in this country who are willing to work for cash under the table or who are willing to work for very, very low wages with phony baloney Social Security cards, which is most of what you're seeing in the meatpacking industry, in the construction industry, and in the agriculture industry, those things are depressing wages. Now, I get it that, we've built an entire economy on basically having immigrants come in and for crap wages pick our food. And if we paid Americans, $15, $20 an hour to start picking lettuce, the price of lettuce is going to go up. I get that. I'm not opposed to that. I think we should be paying people a decent wage. I'm with Cesar Chavez on this, and I think that it's going to raise the price of our food. But the bigger point is that Trump says that his solution to this problem of basically the entire construction industry, the entire meatpacking industry now being de-unionized. I mean, these used to be major union industries. Back when I was a teenager, I had a roommate, or he rented the room right next door to me, who was a construction worker. I was going to college, he was building houses, and he was a member of the union. And he was making good money. He was making the same kind of income my dad was making, and he was in his early 20s. He was like 22, 23 years old. And he was getting big and muscular, too, from wielding the hammer all day long. I mean, it's good, hard work, right? I was impressed. But, he doesn't have that job anymore. Those jobs, those union jobs are gone. So instead of going after the people who came here looking for a better life, that's the American way, by the way. That's how this country was populated by, mostly white people, who came here looking for opportunity and dragging a bunch of black people with them. I get that, but, that's the American dream, right? Is come to America and do better. Instead of going after those people, why don't we go after the employers? Mitt Romney was right about this. Throw some employers in jail who are hiring people who are not here with legal status. And you will see a whole lot of people who just can't find a job anymore just going, hey, Mexico wasn't that bad. Now, I get it that there are a lot of people who are genuine refugees, and we need to be, America needs to be a place where refugees can come. We made a horrible mistake prior to World War II when we turned away the SS, whatever it was, Liberty? No, it was something else. The name of that ship that had the whole ship full of Jews that had come from Europe, and we turned them back, and they ended up in the death camps. I mean, we don't want to be that America. That's the America that Donald Trump wants us to be. We want to be a home for refugees. It was the USS St. Louis. Thank you, Sean. But that doesn't mean that we just don't do anything. We need comprehensive immigration reform. We need to have very specific limits on how many people come in, and we need to provide opportunities for them when they do come in. We need to make it easier for them to integrate into American society rather than forcing them essentially into ghettoized enclaves where they don't integrate. We can do this. I mean, we can't do it now that the Republicans are in charge, but we can certainly be planning for, when the Democrats take over. Knock wood, if there is still an America.
Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Anyhow, sorry about the rant. I'll get back to your calls right after this. We'll do that. Welcome back, Dave in Hale, Michigan. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I just wanted to ask you a question. The previous caller had just about my whole rant about this thing. And what it is I wonder if a windfall profits tax is not considered on the overseas market for imports. Because import tax, to me, is just a big blanket of cover-up for a profits tax. Am I right? Because this is the way I look at it, and same way he was looking at it. We have a manufactured retail price and a wholesale manufactured price in this country. They don't. The big companies and corporations are going to... Is there any kind of transparency that shows profit, not income, but profit tax that we can lean on for this situation legally?
Here's the problem, Dave, and it's kind of it's similar to the early problems that Europe had when they tried to enforce the value-added tax back in the 30s and 40s, and I mean they've figured that out now. But let's say that there's a toy made in China that it costs the manufacturer, an American manufacturer, let's say, a famous toy company in America goes to China and says, okay, make our little bunnies in China. The little bunnies cost, 25 cents a piece when they're manufactured. They ship them to the United States. The manufacturer takes delivery of them at the Port of Los Angeles and sells them to a warehouse, a middleman, a wholesaler. The wholesaler buys these bunnies that cost the manufacturer 25 cents each, buys them for $1 each, or $2 each. The bunnies then get sold from the wholesaler to retail stores all over the country, and retail stores sell them for anywhere from $2 to $10 each. So how do you, if you're going to determine a tax on profits on imported goods, at that point you're dealing with dozens or possibly hundreds of retailers, could be a handful or could be many wholesalers. And it would be so much easier to simply say when that bunny leaves China, a similar bunny made in the United States will cost $2. And when that 25-cent bunny leaves China, there's going to be a $1.75 tariff on it to equalize the cost of manufacturing in the United States. Period. Let the manufacturer deal with it. The manufacturer now has the choice. They can pay $2 for a bunny from China, or they can pay $2 for a bunny from the United States. And if they're buying them in the United States, they have the added benefit of knowing that you're not going to have supply chains break down. You're not going to be subject to tariff wars. You're not going to be subject to big problems if China decides that they're going to invade Taiwan, et cetera. And by the way, you could replace China with any other, Malaysia, Indonesia, Mexico, fill in the blank, right? Tariffs are really the easiest way to do this. This is why Alexander Hamilton recommended them. It's why England had tariffs, going back into the 10th century. It's why tariffs have such a long history. They work, and they're simple.
But doesn't that have something to do with the incentive for the companies to be here? Because we've got stuff that's manufactured over there and it's assembled over here.
Well, then you put a tariff on the parts that are brought into the United States, again, to bring them up to the cost of manufacturing them in the United States. And at that point, it's like, why are we manufacturing the parts in China when we could just as easily manufacture them here for the exact same price because of the tariffs? And that's why you don't want like blanket 25% tariffs. Those are punitive. You want targeted tariffs that are specific. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So MAGA Mike and the Republicans want a religious test for people running for public office. They want to know that you are sufficiently Christian to be worthy of being elected. Right. MAGA Mike is one of these 7 mountain evangelicals. There are 7 domains where these dominionists believe that we need to have religion completely take them over. Education, religion, family, business, government and military, arts and entertainment, and the media. Seriously. This is not what Jesus was preaching when he said, give unto Caesar what is Caesar and unto God what is God's. This is the opposite, in fact, of what Jesus was teaching. It's the opposite of Matthew 25, where Jesus said the only way to get to heaven is by feeding the hungry, healing the sick, helping the poor. This is counter-Christian, anti-Christian, in fact. In fact, I think you could say it is the Antichrist's work. There's a piece about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out.
Turn off that channel, it's filling you with lies, spreading fear and anger beneath those polished ties. They twist the truth and bend the facts, it's all a grand disguise. Don't let them rot your mind away, don't buy their alibis. Don't listen to Fox, so-called news. It's misleading, it's wrong, it's designed to confuse. It will watch your brain and make you mean. Turn off the noise and say the truth unseen. They profit from division and from the seeds of hate. They turn our friends to enemies and twist the public fate. They shout with indignation while hiding what is true. Don't let them take your kindness. Don't let them poison you. Don't listen to Fox.
Welcome back. 53 minutes past the hour. Picking up your calls here. Or is it Linnea or Linnea in Santa Fe?
Hi, it's Linnea.
Linnea. Oh, okay. I got it. What's up, Linnea?
Yeah, happy early Thanksgiving. I just wanted to make a clarification about Stephen Spoonamore's recent ballot statements. Mm-hmm. He didn't really back off. What he said on his Substack yesterday is actually that he wanted to clarify the points because of the distraction that this focus caused.
Well, he also said I shouldn't have used the phrase bullet ballots.
Right. And he said it still could be part of the issue. And in any case, he said it's clear that a very large set of irregularities exist, especially the fact that the shocking number of states declaring Trump won outside of recount levels, while the Democrats won the down ballot outside of recount levels, remains, in his view, outside of credibility.
I agree.
So he hasn't actually backed off. He's clarifying, homing in on the details, and
I get
he's still on it.
I get that, but clarifications, they can bite you in the butt. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah. All right. Well, in any case, he's still on it, and he's looking at more into the details of it.
And he's got a great Substack newsletter that you can find. Just go over to Substack and plug in Stephen Spoonemore, and it'll pop right up, and you can subscribe to it for free. Linnea, thank you so much. I appreciate the data. Yep. Sandra in Los Angeles. Hey, Sandra, what's up?
Yes. Hi, Tom. I love your show, by the way. I wake up listening to it every day to basically give my mind some coffee.
Well, thank you. Is there a butt coming?
Say that again?
Is there a butt coming? But?
No, there is no but. Okay. There is no but. I just think the United States is just, with immigration, and I am a legal immigrant myself, grew up in the United States, served in the military, all the wonderful stuff, but I think the United States is a victim of its own success because the United States was never founded to allow any post-colonial country, after they won their independence from white settlers and white supremacy governments that were set up all over the globe, they never intended to let them take a place at the table to manufacture from using their own natural resources, whether it's gold that they mined from Africa, or now it's cobalt, whether it's diamonds that they got from these countries. They never allowed these countries to be able to turn their raw material to bring them to the market. They always played them against each other to sell their raw materials cheaply to Europe, at which time Europe and the United States would manufacture them, keeping these countries poor. So by the fact that it was a post-colonial white supremacist setup with the World Bank, always Americans and Europeans being in charge, the IMF, they set up this system where the countries remain poor. And therefore, you have nearly 200 countries in the world, probably a little more, and only 8 are rich. Despite all the vast natural resources on Earth, that is a travesty. So therefore, you have all of these scores of people not having opportunity and all wanting to come to the shores of Europe and the United States. So by the fact that they created inequity, now they created a crisis.
Yeah, that's a good point. I would add, the climate crisis to that as well. An awful lot of the people coming to the United States right now are Guatemalan refugees whose land is turned into desert. But I get your point, and it's a clear indictment of colonialism or neo-colonialism. Thank you, Sandra. We'll be back on the other side of the break. I want to do a deep dive into my new book, The Hidden History of the American Dream. Stay with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at ThomHartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at ThomHartmann.com. So check them all out at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com.
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B. And it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Wayward promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2 to 1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to Hour 3 of our program. I want to interview myself here after having done, I don't know, 30 or 40 of these things during our virtual and physical book tour. About my new book, The Hidden History of the American Dream, The Demise of the Middle Class and How to Rescue Our Future. And I'm just going to go through the book here with you over the course of the next 30 minutes. And then I'll pick up your calls on the other side of the bottom of the hour and share with you, basically this new book that I wrote, which, by the way, I think is a great holiday gift. Shameless plug department. But it's my newest book. It just came out just a few weeks ago. It's The Hidden History of the American Dream. And it starts out, it doesn't quite start out this way, but it makes reference to this. It's dealt with in more detail in a few of my other books, but my other hidden history books, the one on neoliberalism and the one on democracy. But it is referenced in this book that it really starts back in the 1770s. In the 1770s, when we had the Revolutionary War and we wrote the Constitution, Adam Smith, who was most famous for writing Wealth of Nations, wrote another book that was actually, I think, far more important. It was called A Theory of Moral Sentiments. And in A Theory of Moral Sentiments, Smith makes a point that, by the way, is also made by Thomas Paine in his book, or in his pamphlet, Agrarian Justice, that if you don't intervene in a capitalist economy, you predictably always get basically the same result, which is a very small percentage of people who are very, very wealthy. They've won the capitalism game, the winners, the top 1% or 1/100th of 1%. Below them, you've got a very small middle class, 2, 3, 4, 5% at the most. And this is doctors, lawyers, shopkeepers, what today we would refer to as the upper middle class. And then below that is the bottom 95%, the working poor, who have no power and no wealth and live in perpetual debt. That's the consequence of unregulated capitalism. Adam Smith pointed this out in both of his books. This is, the author of The Iron Law of Wages, wrote about this. Keynes wrote about it. This is no secret. In fact, every book that Charles Dickens ever wrote was about this. Christmas Carol, we're heading toward the Christmas holidays here. Christmas Carol, in that story, the top 1%, the richest, the people who controlled 80% of the wealth in England, are completely absent. You don't see them. That's the royal family and all their cronies. Ebenezer Scrooge was the middle class in England. He was a small businessman. His business was so small, in fact, that he had only one employee, Bob Cratchit. He was the bottom end of the middle class. And then, of course, Bob Cratchit represented the 95% of the working poor. Charles Dickens knew this well. His own father went to debtor's prison. So that's what you get with unregulated capitalism. Well, back in the 1770s, Adam Smith and Thomas Paine and even Thomas Jefferson all wrote about the possibility that with government intervention, you could create a larger middle class than just that 2 or 3 or 4 or 5%. But we never really did it. In 1933, when Franklin Roosevelt became president, the middle class in America was 15% of us. Now, keep in mind, when Reagan came into office, it was 65% of us. What happened? How did we get there in just 40 years? Or 50 years? What happened was Franklin Roosevelt and Francis Perkins, his labor secretary, and Eleanor Roosevelt, his wife, and John Maynard Keynes got together and said, we're going to intervene in the marketplace in a way that will build an American middle class that's more than half of us. It had never happened before in any country in the world. It was unheard of. It was an insane idea. But he said, we're going to do it. And he did it by legalizing unions, by having a minimum wage all across, national, federal minimum wage that was actually a living wage at the time. It would, today's equivalent of the original minimum wage would be somewhere around $18 an hour. A minimum wage with unemployment insurance, Social Security, so that when people aren't working in their old age, they don't become destitute and become a burden on their families. And federal jobs programs to plant 1 billion trees, to build highways, to build bridges, the Tennessee Valley project to generate electricity, the Hoover Dam to generate electricity. I mean, he just built America with federal tax dollars. And he paid for it with a 90% income tax on the morbidly rich people in this country and a 55% income tax on corporate profits. Now, corporations didn't have to pay that tax if they took their profits and used it to pay their employees well, or to develop new products, research and development, or to open new stores. Those are all tax deductible. So there were ways that corporations that were very, very, growing like crazy and doing very well still didn't pay any taxes because they did the things that were good for them and good for the country. That's why high corporate taxes are a good thing, because they force good corporate behavior. Now, into the mix here, into the middle of this, as we were in the 1950s, the early 1950s, 1951, the year I was born, as we were passing through the early 1950s, we started approaching 50% of us being in the middle class. FDR's dream. Never happened before. And Russell Kirk published a book in 1951 titled The Conservative Mind, From Burke to Eliot. That's from Edmund Burke, the famous British, actually he was Irish, I believe, economist and philosopher who famously said, it does me no harm if a man is allowed to engage in a profession as servile as that of tallow maker or hairdresser, candle maker or hairdresser, but it does society considerable violence if such a man is allowed to govern. In other words, vote. From Burke to Eliot, T.S. Eliot was a famous conservative. He was a poet, famous conservative in the early 20th century, who also didn't think women and wealthy people and poor people should be allowed to vote. So in his book, Russell Kirk proposed that a growing middle class could be a very dangerous thing for America, that America should have classes and orders, that we should basically have a caste system. Now, at the time that he wrote at the time that he wrote that book, he was widely considered a crackpot by Republicans. Barry Goldwater loved it. William F. Buckley loved it. He wrote about it. But most Republicans just thought he was nuts, particularly the Eisenhower Republicans. Eisenhower completely rejected Russell Kirk. Eisenhower was president from 53 to 61. Republican. And a number of the writers around Russell Kirk started saying, well, how does this play out? Well, if too many people get into the middle class, see, the problem was, the belief was that the middle class people, because they weren't born to great wealth, And they had no experience in governing. Their parents had not been legislators or senators or presidents or anything like that. Didn't know how to run a country. And so if you let them vote and you let them decide policy, it would ruin the country. And so some of the writers around Kirk suggested that 3 things would happen if we hit 50% middle class. Number 1, young people would no longer respect their elders, and that would cause society to disintegrate. A lost generation. Number 2, women would no longer know their place in the family, and that would cause society to disintegrate. And women would be in the workplace competing with men, which would cause economic chaos. And number 3, minorities, specifically and largely black people, would demand instant equality with white people, and that would produce social chaos. Again, most Republicans thought this was nutty stuff. And then came the 60s. In 1961, the FDA legalized the birth control pill. So by 1965, you had a full-blown women's movement, women saying, hey, we can control our reproductive capacity. We want a job. And we want parity with men. By 1966, you had an anti-war movement. By 67, it had exploded. Young men out there burning their draft cards, sitting in on college campuses, being shot at by the National Guard at Kent State. And throughout the 60s, you had the peak of the civil rights movement that really blew up when Martin Luther King was assassinated and American cities were on fire. And at that point, in the late 60s, the Republicans looked around at each other and said, holy crap, Russell Kirk was right when he wrote The Conservative Mind. And he and the people around him said that if the middle class ever got too big, it was going to take America to ruin. It was going to destroy American society, and the communists will come in and pick up whatever's left over. So when Ronald Reagan came into office in 1981, he had one job, and that was reduce the size of the middle class, because the middle class was so big. It was 2/3 of us at that time in 1981. It was so big, it represented a threat to the stability and future of our country. And so Reagan set about killing off the middle class. Destroy the unions. A third of us were in unions at that time. Now it's only 11%. Destroy the unions. Freeze the minimum wage. Make it really hard to get unemployment insurance. Drop the top tax rate from 74% down to 25%. Stop enforcing antitrust laws. Let corporations get as big as they want. Make it much, much harder for working people to unionize. All of this stuff together. Oh, and free trade. And Reagan, embraced free trade. Yeah, let companies go overseas for their manufacturing. In fact, it was the Reagan administration that wrote the NAFTA agreement that was later signed by Bill Clinton, that was so contentious in the '92 election. And so with these 4 or 5 tools, Ronald Reagan took the American middle class over a 43-year period. Reaganism took the American middle class from 2/3 of us down to where we are right now, which is 43% of us. The story continues. We're talking about the hidden history of the American dream, the demise of our middle class, and how to rescue our future. My newest book. I'm sharing with you what's in the book, and I will continue on the other side of this break. Stay with us. It's 18 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I'll be right back with more of the hidden history of the American dream. Now, when I get into, how we got here and where we're at, there's some important numbers to know. When my generation, I'm a boomer, right? I'm in my 70s. When my generation was in our 30s, we controlled 21.3% of the nation's wealth. That's why in our 20s, Louise and I were able to buy a house. We've started 7 businesses. 5 of them were relatively successful. 2 of them were very successful. One of them was just a terrible failure, blew up in our face, declared bankruptcy. been there, done that, learned from it. But we could do that because our generation controlled 21% of the nation's wealth. We had no debt. You could go to college for basically free. I didn't graduate from college, but the years that I went, I paid my tuition and I paid for my room and board. I moved out of my parents' house when I was 16. And when I paid for room and board and I paid for tuition by pumping gas at an Esso station on Trowbridge Road and washing dishes at Bob's Big Boy across the street, other than the one day when all the waitresses went on strike and I had to be a waiter. And I've been over-tipping waiters ever since. But anyhow, a long story from the 60s. But the bottom line is that you could go to college. There was no student debt. In the state of Michigan and in most states around the country, I don't know if there were any states that were exceptions to this. I'm guessing that there probably were, probably in the South, but certainly in Michigan, where I grew up, the law was that hospitals had to be nonprofit and insurance companies, health insurance companies, had to be nonprofit. And so when we started our first really successful business, this was in 1971 or 72, the Woodley Herba Company. It was an herbal tea company, and we ended up selling it to our employees and moving to New Hampshire to start a community for abused kids. We started that business. We ended up with 18 people working for us in our little factory, making herbal teas and potpourris and smoking mixtures and stuff. We were able to provide health insurance to every single one of our employees. My recollection is it cost $35 per month per person. We got it through Blue Cross Blue Shield, which was nonprofit. All three hospitals in Lansing, Sparrow, which was endowed by a vice president of Oldsmobile, whose last name was Sparrow, a nonprofit. St. Lawrence, which was the Catholic hospital, nonprofit. And Ingham Medical, which was run by the county, Ingham County, which is where Lansing is. All three hospitals were nonprofit. By the way, today, all three hospitals are for-profit, and Blue Cross Blue Shield is for-profit. This was the product of the Reagan Revolution. And that's why it costs a damn fortune to go to the hospital or get health insurance. So basically, back then, we controlled 21% of the nation's wealth. People in their 30s today control 4.6% of the nation's wealth. One quarter of what we had? Less than a quarter of what we had? And people want, and we've got a $2 trillion student debt crisis, and we've got 500,000 Americans every year who go bankrupt, lose their homes, lose their families, lose everything because somebody in their family got sick. That's where we're at as a result of Reaganism. So let's, on the other side of this break, talk about how do we get back from this? What do we do to recover, to reclaim the American middle class? Stay tuned. I'll be right back with you. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Way back in 1964, when Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, the Republicans started this rant about how the election of 1960, Jock Kennedy stole that election, and there's voter fraud in America. And it became a thing. They started this thing called Operation Eagle Eye. William Rehnquist was running it in Arizona, trying to intimidate Hispanics and African Americans into not voting, essentially. They have now used this claim that non-citizens are voting, this voter fraud claim, in virtually every red state to make it harder to vote, to purge people off the voting rolls, to make people's votes not counted with their exact signature matches. It's a scam. It's a grift that they've been running for 60 years, and the American media won't call them out on it. There's a whole piece about it called Trump and the GOP's Big Lie 2.0 over at HartmannReport.com. Please check it out. You'll find it fascinating.
You're a mean one, Mr. Trump. You govern with disdain. You stacked the court with chaos and left us all in pain, Mr. Trump. You've got a heart that's smaller than a microscopic grain. You're a cruel one, Mr. Trump. You separated kids. You built a wall of malice where humanity forbids, Mr. Trump. You deport a puppy just for chewing on your lids. You're a bigot, Mr. Trump. A xenophobic mess.
Welcome back. 25 minutes past the hour. So what do we do about this, right? I pointed out when my generation was in our 30s, we had 21% of the nation's wealth. The generation right now in their 30s have 4.6% of the nation's wealth. How do we get back our middle class? Straightforward. This is actually the easiest part of the whole thing, and it's the last half of the book. The way that we get back, it's not rocket science. We did this before. We went from 15% middle class in 1933 to 65% middle class in 1981. Steady growth, continuous. How did we do it? Pretty straightforward stuff, and that's the list in the book. We had a high-quality public education system that educated everybody in this country for free. We had a college system across the country where you could go to college for free or damn close to free. In California, it was entirely free. We had housing was inexpensive. When my dad bought his house in 1957, the house that he died in, for $15,000. At that point in time, housing cost on average, the median house in America cost twice the median wage. Dad made around $7,000 a year. He bought a $13,000 or $15,000 house, I forget which. About twice his annual salary. That was normal. Today, the median house is $460,000, and the median salary is around $44,000. In other words, today, housing is 10 times the median salary. Why? Because we've commodified housing. You got big hedge funds, you got foreign investors, all this kind of stuff. We need to fix housing. We need to fix child care. We need to bring our jobs back home. We talked earlier about the importance of targeted, rational tariffs. We need to deal with climate change. We need to make Congress wear NASCAR patches. In other words, we need to get money out of politics and stop the legal bribery of people because of Citizens United. We need paid sick leave and low-cost child care. And we need a national health care program. I mean, it's pretty straightforward stuff. And we need to start taxing the rich again.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
This is all stuff we've done before, and it worked. We can do it again once Democrats get power again. Spread the word.
Today we're reading from David Enrich's book, Dark Towers, Deutsche Bank, Donald Trump, and an Epic Trail of Destruction. This is from Chapter 10. It's titled The Mar-a-Lago Prize. In 1905, a German immigrant living in the Bronx set up a small barber shop on the ground floor of a newly constructed building at 60 Wall Street, in the heart of Manhattan's booming financial district. In an era before skyscrapers, the 25-story L-shaped tower was a landmark, its gargoyle-guarded roof visible from the nearby waterfront. The barbershop thrived, offering shaves and trims to a procession of bankers, stock exchange traders, lawyers, and office workers. The barber's name was Frederick Trump. The same year that he opened the shop, his wife gave birth to a boy named Fred. Many years passed, and the barbershop closed, and the old 60 Wall Street gave way in 1989 to a new 60 Wall Street, a 47-story tower topped with a distinctive pyramid roof. For a time, it was home to J.P. Morgan and Company. Then the bank left, and in 2005, Deutsche Bank started relocating its American staff, displaced ever since 9/11, to its new home at 60 Wall Street. And so Frederick Trump's grandson, born to Fred's wife in 1946, became an occasional visitor to the site of his grandfather's old barbershop. Deutsche's relationship with Donald Trump had only deepened since Mike Offit left. Justice Justin Kennedy, this is the son of Justice Anthony Kennedy. Justin Kennedy, now a managing director, had become a key point contact for Trump and helped chaperone large real estate deals for him through the bank. Kennedy's role was to find customers to buy portions of loans after Deutsche dispensed the money, a process that allowed Deutsche Bank to make larger loans than it otherwise could have. Kennedy sometimes sat with Trump in his luxury box at the U.S. Open tennis tournament or at Manhattan nightclubs, where Trump would park himself at a table in the corner facing outward, holding court like a mafia don. Now, with Kennedy's encouragement, Deutsche hurried along a Henry Villard-like path. In 2000, the bank had plunked down another $150 million to be used for the renovations of Trump's building at 40 Wall Street. The next year, Deutsche agreed to extend Trump a mortgage worth more than $900 million, at the time the largest ever on a single property, so he could buy the General Motors building on the southeastern corner of New York's Central Park. Trump already owned half of the 50-story building. He wanted the rest. And in 2002, Deutsche agreed to refinance about $70 million that he owed on some of his Atlantic City casinos. Those loans came out of Deutsche's commercial real estate division, which Kennedy was helping to run. Not everyone was enamored with Trump. Seth Waugh, W-A-U-G-H, one of Edson's many Merrill Lynch recruits and the head of Deutsche's American operations, learned around 2001 that the bank was planning to lend Trump about $500 million to use as he wished, basically an unrestricted cash infusion to stabilize the developer's flagging finances. Waugh had previously witnessed up close the carnage that Trump could inflict on imprudent financial institutions. At Merrill, Edison had assigned him the task of mopping up after Trump defaulted on nearly $700 million of bonds that Merrill had helped sell for his Taj Mahal casino in Atlantic City. Waugh was in no hurry to repeat the experience at Deutsche. He voiced strong objections to the proposed new loan to Trump, in which Trump would not have had to put up any hard assets as collateral, and the deal soon died. Yet Deutsche's broader Trump relationship rumbled on. In 2003, another arm of Deutsche, focused on helping companies raise money by selling stocks and bonds to investors, agreed to work with Trump. The point man on this part of the relationship was Richard Byrne, another Merrill veteran who had been involved in the Taj Mahal debacle. Byrne had helped sell the ill-fated Taj bonds to investors. Now Trump hired Byrne's group at Deutsche to issue bonds for his troubled Trump hotel and casino resorts. Byrne knew this would be an uphill battle. Not only had Trump defaulted in the past, but he also had recently been taunting investors that he might stop paying back other outstanding bonds. Waugh didn't warn Byrne about the recently rejected $500 million loan, and so Byrne organized a roadshow for Trump to meet with and try to win over big institutional investors. He escorted Trump to meetings all over New York and Boston. At every stop, boardrooms and auditoriums were jammed with traders, fund managers, senior executives, and secretaries curious to see the Donald show, and Trump didn't disappoint. He rocked, he rolled, and he delivered wildly optimistic and inconsistent financial projections. Afterward, Trump called Byrne to ask how much money they'd raised. The answer, alas, was virtually zero. Byrne braced for an explosion as he explained to Trump that though he'd been treated like a celebrity, nobody trusted him with their money. Trump took the rejection in stride. "Let me talk to your salespeople," he requested. Byrne agreed, and Trump came to deliver a pep talk. "Fellas, I know this isn't the easiest thing you've all had to sell," he acknowledged, "but if you get this done, you'll all be my guests at Mar-a-Lago." Trump was always good at pushing an audience's buttons. A weekend with Trump at Mar-a-Lago, bragging rights that not even money could buy, and this new incentive did the trick. The salesman worked the phones, cast a wider net for more clients, and managed to sell an impressive $485 million of junk bonds, albeit at a high interest rate that reflected investors' fears that Trump might default.
Help support Progressive Radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, or one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio, and tag you're it. So back when Donald Trump debated Kamala Harris, he was asked about world leaders and whatnot, and he went off on this thing praising a guy named Viktor Orban and saying he's a tough guy, he's smart, he's the prime minister of Hungary, and he loves me, basically. So who is Viktor Orban? Well, it turns out Viktor Orban is a guy who took over Hungary in a regular election, the prime minister, and then turned it into basically a neo-fascist paradise for right-wingers. All the media is now controlled by right-wing oligarchs. He's packed the courts. He's changed the Constitution so that they have things like gerrymandering and voter suppression, so he always wins every election. He throws people in jail for criticizing him, even on Facebook. I mean, this is what Hungary has become. Fox News loves it. Tucker Carlson did his show from there for a week, and that's what Donald Trump wants to do to America. You can read the whole thing over at HartmannReport.com. It's titled Trump's New Hero, the strongman who crushed democracy in Hungary. Check it out.
The words unsaid, the hurt we've known, can grow if seeds of love are sown. A kind embrace, a gentle smile, can turn the bitter into worthwhile. Forgiveness flows like autumn rain, washing away the hurt and pain. At Thanksgiving, they start anew, with hearts united, strong and true. This Thanksgiving, we choose to mend, to find the strength to love again. With gratitude, we'll light the way. This Thanksgiving, let peace stay. The table's set, the candles glow, a gentle peace begins to show. The year's been hard, but here we stand.
36 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls here. Happy Thanksgiving, by the way. It can be a beautiful time of year as we contemplate the darkness ahead. Picking up your calls here, Bradley in Northport, Michigan. Hey, Bradley, what's on your mind today?
Yeah. Again, thanks. Happy Thanksgiving to you, Tom, and your staff that does a great job, and your family, and America. Thank you for the reflection you did on your new book. It resonates with me. I'm from Michigan, a little bit older, but a lot of commonality in there where things were affordable, and I thought at that point everything was doable.
Yeah.
And couldn't have been more enthusiastic.
Well, everything was doable back then. I mean,
and I guess that's what they say when refer back to when Make America Great Again.
Yeah.
Because that was a pretty good time, I think, for us all.
At least for us white guys. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. As I saw going on, that became really evident. But yeah, the tenor of my call, as I told your screener, was I would like to pierce the inner sanctum of whoever gets with Joe Biden and just offer up to start giving pardons. Get proactive with it to Milley, to Kelly, to Liz Cheney, to Adam Schiff, anybody across
Kinzinger,
the country that has been
and start with Hunter Biden.
Correct. No, that is a caveat. I think everyone other than Hunter and himself. And you present what America really is in doing that. And I think they would be in agreement, Hunter and maybe Joe himself in that regard. But it is such a wide arc.
Do you know what they're prosecuting Hunter Biden for, Bradley?
I understand that, but you're going to have to convict him.
But he's already been convicted. Let me just explain this. When you buy a gun, there's a form that you fill out, and it's got a little box on it that says, "Do you use drugs right now?" 20 million, that includes marijuana. 20 million Americans last year bought guns and used marijuana and checked that box saying, "No, I don't." 20 million. Only one of them got arrested for checking that box. That was Hunter Biden. The other thing that Hunter Biden did is when he was working for the Ukrainian group, which I agree was corrupt and he shouldn't have done, but he didn't sell his country out. He just took advantage of his daddy's job, sort of like Don Jr. and Eric and Ivanka and Jared. But when he was working for them, he didn't pay his income taxes. 2 years later, the IRS caught up with him, said, "Pay up your damn taxes." He paid his taxes. He paid them in full. Now, literally, 1 million Americans last year paid their taxes late. The only one who was prosecuted was Hunter Biden. You tell me he shouldn't be pardoned?
No, I take that, Tom, but don't overlook my main point of thousands across the country that are in his crosshair to speak of. And why should they live their life in fear of that, recrimination and reprisal from him? And that's all he has going forward. So, okay, give Hunter and Biden that. But what about the rest of them? And that's what has to be piercing his network, and so he gets proactive with it before he's run out of office.
No, I agree with you on all that. All the generals and former officials that Donald Trump wants to throw in jail. Yeah.
Anybody that's been threatened, it's thousands maybe.
Yeah, no, I'm with you.
What? You give thousands of people the right to live their life in peace.
Yep, I'm with you. Bradley, thank you. Larry in Los Angeles. Hey, Larry, what's up?
Hey, just to make a point about what your last caller was talking about, Biden probably should pardon his son because there's a good chance that Donald Trump will do it to make himself magnanimous.
That's interesting.
And he will do it to act as if, see, I am above politics. And I would rather Biden pardon his son than Donald Trump pardon.
I think Trump is going to throw him in jail. I mean, he's facing 20 years.
There are people who advise Trump to do certain things that actually make him look good, and they will convince him this will make you look good.
Yeah, you may well be right, Larry.
Biden's own father did not pardon his own son. Right. I will do it to get rid of the partisan.
Right. Yeah. Well, also it would set up the possibility of Trump advance pardoning Ivanka and Jared for selling their country out to Saudi Arabia, and Don Jr.
Yeah.
The other day he was rubbing cocaine apparently on his gums during a public event.
And then when people complain about him pardoning his own kids, he will say, "I also pardon Joe Biden."
Yeah, I'll give you that. Back. Yeah, I got it.
I'd like to again address the situation of Bill Clinton and him losing manufacturing jobs. He actually did not lose any manufacturing jobs. Mm-hmm. What happens when there's a graph that you can find, one of those spread graphs, that shows that manufacturing jobs as a percentage of all jobs in America has been going down for every president. Mm-hmm. But that only means that the economy was growing faster than the number of manufacturing jobs.
Well, it also means that the manufacturing sector has been improving efficiency and thus needing fewer employees.
Yeah,
automation.
That too. But you have to go in and look deeper to see, okay, which president actually lost manufacturing jobs as our percentage was going down, mm-hmm. and that is Ronald Reagan, Bush, Trump.
Oh, really?
Clinton actually saw manufacturing jobs grow. Obama, if you take his whole two terms, because he was losing 800,000 jobs a month in his first term because of George Bush's crashed economy.
Right.
It shows that he also lost a few, but that was in the first few months when that was George W. Bush's recession.
Right.
After that, Obama also saw manufacturing jobs grow, and Biden saw manufacturing jobs grow. So this idea that Glass-Steagall or NAFTA or most favored nation status that Bill Clinton signed, or and I'll even throw in the media law that he signed. Mm-hmm. None of that stuff hurt the Democratic presidents, except for the fact that the right-wingers got more powerful. But none of that stuff that's caused Democratic presidents to have a recession or to lose jobs. Mm-hmm. That only happened when feckless Republicans get in the White House. And so and if I may jump over to what I said recently, I'm sitting here looking at the Dow gain points and the VIX go up and it appears that it tries to knock the Dow down, mm-hmm. and then the Dow overpowers it. And I think that every time that VIX jumps up, I think that's the Fed pulling billions out of the Dow. Yeah. And I suspect that the Fed doesn't have to pull the same amount of money out of each index. And so they're trying to stop Joe Biden from seeing percentage gain that's greater than what Trump saw. He already has more points added, but they're trying to stop him from seeing a percentage gain over Donald Trump. Yeah. And I watched this now for several weeks happen, and this is the Fed. I really do believe that the Fed fingers on the scale is when the VIX goes up. Yeah. And I actually think that day traders can actually use that to gain wealth in this trade. Yeah. So I think the Fed is corrupt. I think he's a blatant bald-faced liar, and I think he hates the normal American people because he gave trillions to the Fed.
Yeah. Well, clearly, I mean, Jerome Powell is a member of the banking elite, so a very, very wealthy banking elite. He's been a lifelong Republican. So I give a lot of credibility to your comments, Larry. Thank you very much. 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Exposing the con in conservative. I'll be right back with you, folks. And welcome back. Cece in Northbrook, Illinois. Hey, Cece, what's on your mind today?
Happy Thanksgiving, Tom. And, and I want to commend your wife for those lyrics.
I'll pass it along.
Country guy. I'm not a country guy. I'm an R&B guy, so maybe she can mix it up a little bit for something for me.
I'll pass that along.
But her lyrics are really on point. But I was calling you just to reemphasize the fight. And you were talking about earlier, whereas the Democrats, it's almost like this is the perfect time for Democrats. This fear thing and this, people call in and have a type of a dismay or what's the term you use in your cliche, despair.
Yeah.
And I feel that, and it's understandable. But we're going to have to pick ourselves up and fight. And then what I mean by that, what we are lacking is the power of the amp, I see. Where we don't, when I say power of the amp, we can't amplify our message. We have to deal with the message that's given to us. Mm-hmm. And that's a disadvantage. And what we're seeing with Democratic leadership, we got a massive failure on the national level as far as leadership. That's Republicans included. Now, they're just cowards, but they're getting their money. So, but as far as leadership, I feel so bad for the children because in some of these children's lifetime, they'll never see a Martin Luther King or John Kennedy or Bobby Kennedy or so forth. Mm. And so all they know is this Trump thing, this hate and this all that, that really brings us down as a country. And like you said, we're not educated. The education system is being broken down. But what I'm pleading for is leadership. And I guess the person off the top of my head would be Obama, because Kamala is showing. This is probably why Kamala didn't make it out of the primary, because you got to dictate, you got to lead. Don't wait to see where the crowd is going and get in front of it. And this is the perfect time for any leader in the Democratic Party to stand up, because it's clear you don't have the protection of the government anymore. This takes guts, because we don't know where we're going to be going after January 20th when Trump comes in. We are in the unknown. Is he going to be as bad as he say he is, which I think he will? People are going to die. People are going to get hurt. You got to be ready for it. Our leaders should be preparing us for, catastrophe, right. And that's not happening.
Yeah. When the Democrats said that Trump was a fascist, were they gaslighting us? I mean, why their hair was on fire back then? Why isn't it right now? I don't get it.
Exactly, because I see there's a fear factor there. And I understand so because, nobody wants to get hurt, Tom.
They're obeying in advance.
I commend you.
Yep, they're obeying in advance.
I commend you.
Thank you, Larry.
I commend you, Tom. But one more thing. Your political guest, perfect example. Next time they come on, sometimes I want to call, but I don't want to use my one call a week for that. Because what I'm seeing with them, they're doing the same old thing. The one from Wisconsin that somebody pointed out to him the message. that we deliver. And then the guy brought up about rape in Texas. Rape has gone up. This guy pivoted, your politicians pivoted and said rape is not the issue. It's the economy and inflation. Oh, please, man.
Yeah, I get it. By the way, CC, I'm sorry we're out of time, but we suspend the one call a week rule for politician guests. So even if you've already called once in a week, you can still call and talk to one of the legislators. So just FYI. Yeah, good talking to you, CC. Thank you. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. When Ronald Reagan took over America in 1981, we handed him a brand gleaming new country. Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Truman, Dwight Eisenhower, Jack Kennedy, they had built America. We had brand new schools, brand new hospitals, brand new interstate highway systems, brand new airports, infrastructure. We were the envy of the world. And then Republicans came along and they said, well, you just cut the top tax rate from 74% down to 27% and everything will trickle down. Instead, what do we get? Billionaires and poverty. They said, hey, just deregulate guns and an armed society is a polite society. Instead, we've got more school shootings than anywhere in the world. They said, just kill off civics and history classes in our schools and liberate our young people to focus on science and math. Now we've got people who don't know how our government works. I mean, it just goes on from there. There's a whole rant about it over at HartmannReport.com titled FDR Saved America, Then the GOP Ripped Us Apart. Check it out.
This Thanksgiving, we're here to say the Thom Hartmann crew thanks you every day for the calls you make, the thoughts you share, for the hope you bring and the fight you bear. You tune in strong, you stand up tall. Together we're answering democracy's call. This Thanksgiving, we're grateful it's true. The Thom Hartmann crew thanks you. Together we'll stand, we won't ever quit. This Thanksgiving we're stronger through and through. For the fight you bring, we thank you.
Welcome back, 52 minutes past the hour. Picking up your calls here. Joe in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Hey, Joe, what's up?
Not much, Tom. You're brilliant as always. First little factoid for you. You know, Viktor Orban was an atheist, actually documented atheist, before he found God to run for office. And it just reminded me of Trump.
Yep.
The other thing is I think we have to start referring to MAGA correctly, which is Make America Gilded Again.
Oh, that's a good one.
I think that's what it really is. As far as I'm beating up the DNC and all that stuff on the election, I think it was a failure to educate because a lot of people have disinformation. You have to educate them. They didn't do it.
Yep.
And they're too close to the greed. Even though they did a lot, they're too close to the greed. I'll give you a couple examples. The same week that you were on C-SPAN within that 5-day time period, John Larson of Maryland, senator from Maryland, was on C-SPAN.
He's a congressman, I think.
Yeah, I mean, congressman. Yeah, that's right. And he was saying that we should get rid of the filibuster. Really? Were you calling for that when the Democrats actually had the Senate? Right. I thought that was ridiculous.
Right.
There was another, this one blew me away. There was another House member on later, after, a few days later, Democrat, that said he agreed with Citizens United.
Oh, God.
Right. But he said it needed more regulation, like, where we can actually know who the zillionaires are that are buying our country.
Right.
And
that'll
so
help a lot.
This is what I mean. And here's the most important thing, Tom, and I think you have to get your callers to focus in on this. Since August, Chuck Schumer has been sitting on a vote for Lauren McFerrin, who right now the Democrats have a 3-2 advantage on the National Labor Board, right? Mm-hmm. If they don't fill that Trump gets to come in, and he'll put an anti-union, anti-worker, terrible person on that board.
Right.
And Chuck Schumer, I don't know why he's dragging it. He's been able to bring that. Biden nominated her. Mm-hmm. It's been sitting there since August.
Wow.
If he doesn't fill it, the National Labor Relations Board will be run by Republicans during Trump's next 2 years. So everybody needs to call Schumer, even though he's already shut down his office for the holidays. But when that time comes up, they need to call the congressional office. His direct number is 202-224-6542.
Right.
And everybody after the holidays needs to pound him and ask him why he's not moving Lauren McFerrin up for just a vote.
Okay.
They always say we have a democratic republic, so you have a single person blocking everything.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound very democratic.
Yeah.
But anyway, have a great holiday. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you very much, and happy holidays to you, too. Gary in Monroe, Georgia. Hey, Gary, what's up?
Thank you, Tom. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Back at you.
Thank you. For over 17 years around that, I've been lucky enough to have been able to call your show. And your book is about what I call the show all about. The bottom line is entrenched greed. FDR, who with you, me and you, we're probably the biggest fans I know of FDR, right?
Mm-hmm.
And FDR said it best, we have earned the hatred of entrenched greed. But more than this, now we got something else going on. We got a stacked Supreme Court that passed Citizens United, that made a man, I cannot believe it. So we're the problem, too, the fellow Americans who voted in a convicted felon.
Yeah.
Now we got now, along with entrenched greed, we got the other biggie, a different standard of justice.
Yep.
We have a different standard of justice.
Yep. Equal justice under the law. No man is above the law. Those are dead now, officially killed by Merrick Garland.
Well, then we're dead. Then we can't be dead. We got to keep fighting.
Well, we're not dead. No,
we've got to get.
We're not dead at all.
No, I know. You didn't mean it like that, but you said it.
Yeah, Gary, I got to run. Thank you for the call. Hey, thanks for being with us today. We'll be back next week. Have a wonderful holiday. Thanksgiving holiday. Be good to yourself and the people around you. Let's make this a time of healing to the extent that we can, and rejuvenation, so we can hit the ground running next week and really fight the fight. Thanks so much for being with us. Get out there, get active, tag You're It. Have a wonderful and blessed holiday season, and I will catch up with you soon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!